If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
What is your creepiest humanoid being, shadow figure, or otherworldly paranormal creature sighting in the deep woods and forests?
I encountered a possible rake or humanoid creature while at my great-aunt's place in Kentucky. This happened back in 2014. I was visiting my great-aunt and cousins outside of Paintsville, Kentucky, because I hadn't seen them in years, and also I wanted to shoot some guns with my dad. So I and my dad were there for only a few days, and he was taking a nap or helping my aunt with something inside, and it was just me and my cousin shooting BB guns from the bed of my aunt's pickup truck at some random thing, mostly cans, and we were just talking, minding our business, and all of a sudden I hear something rustling on the top of the hill that my aunt lives on, and at the corner of my eye I see this white figure with sunken eyes and a red mouth, and my cousin saw it too. As that was happening, it ran away, and we both grabbed a BB gun and a big knife to basically run after it, but as we were climbing the hill to the clearing, it was gone. Neither my cousin nor I knew what it was, so we kept our eyes on the top of the hill, ensuring it wouldn't return to attack us. Need help identifying a tall figure I saw in the nature reserve. Hi, I live in Dublin, Ireland. I'm not exactly a believer in cryptids like the Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot and haven't really encountered anything odd or strange in my lifetime. Around 2 days ago I went on a walk in a local nature reserve near my house. Typically, I only pass by it to access the pathway home, but this evening I felt the need to clear my mind and decided to walk the entire route. There's a gate around the middle of the nature preserve that separates underbrush and unstable trees from the actual path and has a bench in front, on which I usually sit to listen to music and just relax. When I sat down, I looked through the gate and saw the weirdest thing of my whole life. Looking through the gate, I saw what looked like a tall stick figure, like the ones you'd draw in school, standing around 7 feet from the gate. It was around the 7-foot mark and looked like it was clipping the top of the smaller trees around it. When I saw the thing, I was just stuck looking at it, like something in my body just refused to work, and everything just started tingling like the feeling you get when your legs fall asleep, except all over my body. After about 5 minutes, I looked away, and it felt as if something jerked my neck away, overwhelming me with the urge to vomit. After getting up, I ran away, and I just kept running until I was completely out of breath. I vomited 3 to 4 times before I shakily walked home. That's when I noticed, when I arrived at the bench it was 7 o'clock, but at the time I ran away, checking my phone, it was 10 o'clock. After this happened, I've just felt horribly sick, and I've been coughing badly. Even 2 days later, I just can't seem to relax and need to take deep breaths to feel relaxed. If anyone can help me get to the bottom of what I saw, I'd be thrilled, and before anyone asks, no, I do not take any substances, and I'm not on any form of medication. Origin of the star Gypsies/Indian story. I was wondering if anyone else has come across this. A hiker is in a national park hiking for days by himself. In the deep woods at night, he sees what he takes to be a bright meteor, yet it seems to land near some trees several hundred feet away. Intrigued, he walks towards and reaches a hill. As he looks down, he sees several dozen persons setting up a camp and starting a small fire. He approached them to be social. As he approaches and greets them, he notices that they are wearing odd clothing that seems to be either from an unknown Native American tribe or gypsy styled. They spoke in a barely audible whisper in an unknown language when he tried to interact but could not see their features until he approached the fire. He then noticed how strangely placed their eyes were, neither sharing Asian nor European features. He noticed that while not directly speaking to him, they were not hostile but more amused and stunned he had stumbled on their camp. They all seemed preoccupied with their tasks in the camp and paid little attention to them. The hiker then felt he should leave and walked back from where he came from and set up his own camp, trying to rationalize the encounter and not sleeping. At dawn he returned to the area and found almost no evidence of the night other than the embers of the fire. Now the first time I ever heard anything about this was speaking with my father. He told me he had heard about it on a radio show in the late 70s. I had forgotten about it until I heard it recounted on a video online about true encounters in the deep woods. I recall this experience being mentioned by a caller on open lines on Coast to Coast AM a few years ago while working a night shift. I was curious if anyone else had heard about this encounter or if there was a website that could further explore this topic. Humanoid. A bit of background, so I'm a hardcore skeptic. I don't believe in ghosts, the paranormal, or even skinwalkers. I've never had any paranormal experiences before and had never seen anything in 23 years. However, a couple of years back, I was driving back from an ex-partner's house at about 11 p.m. in rural Lancashire in the north of England. It was late November, from what I remember, so it was a clear night with a big bright moon, and it was very cold out, for England at least. To get to my home, You have to cut off the motorway and take a slightly rural route up a wooded road. It's not a large or dense wood, you can probably walk from one end to the other in 15 to 20 minutes. It's roughly a 5-minute drive through the trees. As I was driving along, the road twisted and turned as it always had the hundreds of other times I had used it, so I had to drive very slowly, 15 to 20 miles per hour, in case a car came around a bend too fast. There are always accidents there, and so I was raising and dipping my headlights in full beam as you do. As I turned a corner, about 30 feet in front of my car was a large, scrawny, gray figure. At first, I thought it was a large branch that had fallen from the tree, so I crept towards it and put on my full beam. When I got within about 10 feet of it, the creature, or whatever it was, moved as if it were doing a press-up, pushing itself up with its arms, and my headlights illuminated its eyes, which glowed like a cat's when you shine a light at them at night. I stopped the car, half expecting it to just be a deer and run out of the way, but the creature didn't move, it just stayed stationary, staring at me, giving me a good 10 to 15 seconds to look at it. It slowly stood up on 2 legs, still looking at me in the car. It was big, the top of my car probably only reached the lower rib cage region, so I'd estimate it was likely 9 to 10 feet tall. It was pale gray, hairless, and gaunt. I could see its rib cage and spine. It had long bony arms, probably each about 4 feet long, and large claw-like hands. Once I had taken all this in and realized the situation, I began to panic, putting my car in reverse, but the creature then just turned and walked calmly and silently off into the woods next to the road. It did not run, it didn't seem scared or intimidated, it almost seemed disinterested. I didn't hang about to investigate the area, I went straight home and locked the door. I spoke to all my friends, all but one of them thought I was joking, but she seemed to take it very, very seriously, having had a similar experience in a similar area a few years ago. She mentioned the term skinwalker, which I had never heard of before. She said it was a bad omen, and after doing some research I can understand why. As I mentioned earlier, I don't really believe in anything, and despite traveling that road at least once or twice a week, I have never seen anything unusual there. Does anyone have any idea what it could have been? We don't have large animals over here in the UK, the biggest we get in my area are badgers and small and medium-sized deer. Certainly not that size, and surely deer would startle in the headlights and run? If it were a skinwalker creature, how could it exist in the UK? I believe that skinwalkers were only found in the USA and Canada. I have no explanation, I'd never seen anything like it before and never have since. I'd be interested to hear people's thoughts and opinions. Winged humanoid. This incident happened in spring 2012 on a nice, sunny day at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon while I was in the car with my boyfriend and mother. I was 20 years old. We were returning from the store, and the road we usually took was rural and had sharp turns. As we pull off the busier FM road onto this road, we get about half a mile down the road to where the first sharp turn is located. At this point right before the curve, there is a large field located diagonally to the right of our position in the street and a property of about 2 to 3 acres directly in front of us. There is a home on this property pushed way back, with a smaller, brushy wood in the very front of their property closest to the road with many trees and thorny bushes. As we begin to take this sharp curve to the left, I see out of the corner of my eye from my position in the front passenger's seat that something black is coming up on us extremely fast. Before I have time to look and see what it is, I notice the black mass to the right of us in the brushy wood. It seemingly slowed its pace down to match the speed of the car, and no noise was emitted. Even stranger was that it didn't maneuver through the wooded area to avoid branches. It simply kept on in a straight line, going about the speed of our vehicle, roughly 25 to 30 miles per hour. At this point my mother and I both were freaking out, but my boyfriend was too preoccupied with his game to look out of the window from the back seat. He was pretty oblivious to things. I tried to discern any distinguishable features, but from what I could tell, the creature looked to be long, like 6.5 to 7 feet long. It was black as night, with a bulbous portion at the front, which I presumed to be the head. I never saw any eyes, or a beak, or even claws. It did have what looked to be a tattered black material flowing at the end, which almost looked like ripped up trash bags but didn't shine like them. As we kept driving about 50 to 75 feet past the start of the wood, there was a sudden end to the wood where the next property began. At this point, the flying thing, still soundless, made a sharp 90-degree turn away from us and disappeared completely. I remember feeling very frightened and paranoid for about a week after this happened and refused to go outside alone. We lived in the country with no streetlights, with no floodlight coming from the house to light the property, and lived across from a large wood ourselves. Some people have tried to tell me that the creature that I saw was a species of large owls or a type of hawk, and I just can't accept that. I've been ridiculed for thinking that it's anything other than normal, but with my history of paranormal experiences, I know that this was something likely not of this world. I even went to a cryptozoologist, and they didn't even seem to know. They guessed that maybe it was witchbird. I had a paranormal encounter with a humanoid cat and experienced a persistent presence. I want to share a paranormal experience I had with my cousin one night that I'll never forget. It was nighttime, and we were walking near a small school where people sometimes leave food for stray cats. Suddenly, we saw a cat behaving very strangely, almost humanoid. Not only was its shape odd, but it sat down staring at us without breaking eye contact for a single second. Next to it, another cat suddenly ran away. What happened next left us frozen. We heard a loud meow, full of fear and pain, and that cat vanished into thin air, without us seeing what happened to it. But the most unsettling thing was that the weird cat watching us didn't run or show fear. Instead, it seemed to be studying us, as if measuring something about us. As we became alarmed by the unusual situation, I heard a whistle immediately adjacent to my ear, so clear and close that it felt as though someone was standing right beside me. When I asked my cousin if he heard it, he said no. It was a sound only I could perceive. Thereafter, I started feeling goosebumps and a strange sensation that something was watching me. When I got home, the feeling persisted. I felt that presence following me, and, to make things worse, I had trouble sleeping. At night, I heard noises near the headboard of my bed that I couldn't explain. Paper-thin humanoid. Hello, I recently discovered your channel and have been following it for the past couple weeks. I've listened to some of your stories about weird creatures in the woods, and I'm completely jarred by the similarity of one eyewitness account to something I saw a few years ago. I've rarely spoken about it simply because it was so singular and difficult to describe, and I've never heard about anything even remotely similar until just now. This incident happened in Montrose, Colorado, in 2012. I was staying with a friend, who lived in a house perched on the edge of Spring Creek Mesa overlooking the town. The view of the town lights was beautiful, so we liked to go for walks at night whenever I stayed there. Her house was surrounded by farm fields and had just one close neighbor, so it was very quiet and peaceful at night. There's a tiny dirt road that runs along the edge of the mesa, towards the homes of the farmers who own the fields, and that's where we would walk. Just a few feet to the side of the road, the ground drops off steeply and slopes down about 100 feet. The hillside is very rocky and covered in trees and bushes. Not something you'd want to find yourself rolling down if you went too far in the dark, so we usually only walked when the moon was out. On this particular night the moon was full and so bright that we commented on how it was practically daylight. We hadn't gotten far from the house when I noticed something standing on the left-hand side of the road, no more than 30 feet ahead. I knew my friend saw it too because we both froze. I could see it clearly thanks to the moonlight and how close it was, but I struggled to describe it. It stood approximately 4 to 4.5 feet tall and had a somewhat humanoid shape, featuring a distinct head, torso, arms, and legs. However, it was narrower than an average person, with disproportionately short legs, while the other body parts, including the head, were freakishly elongated. It seemed to be matte gray all over and had no features whatsoever. No face, no hair, nothing. But the most alarming thing was that it was so thin that it looked like a suit of clothes on a hanger. It was shaped from the front, but from the side it was practically paper thin. I got a look at it from the side because moments after we caught sight of it, it turned and crossed the road in front of us. I can't think of an accurate way to describe how it moved. The legs moved a little, but it didn't seem to take steps. There was no up and down motion. It glided almost fluidly across the road and over the edge of the mesa. I was so shocked that I can't remember if it made any noise as it headed down the hillside with all its bushes and loose rocks. A few seconds later, my friend and I looked at each other and said, "Did you see that?" Almost simultaneously. Then we just turned and ran like hell back to her house. I'm completely at a loss to surmise what this thing may have been. The visual is firmly imprinted in my memory, especially that unbelievable thinness, and I hadn't heard tell of anything similar until I read the former mail carrier's story about the things they encountered in DC while the sightings were 1,600 miles apart, and the thing I saw wasn't wearing any garments. The description of their total flatness stood out to me instantly. I wonder if anyone else has ever seen anything like this. After sharing my mountain giant encounters, my friend tells me his family story with one. This story revolves around his father. I remember the story as clear as the day he told me. He is no longer alive, having passed away on January 15, 2019. However, we discussed this story several times, and the first time he shared it with me is the one that stands out most. He was what they call a pathfinder in Vietnam and had the uncanny ability to blend into his environment like a damn chameleon. He was helping a friend who had gotten a piece of land in the wilds of Alaska for homesteading. He said he observed the giant for about 15 minutes. My dad was 5 feet 10 inches, and he estimated the giant to be about 15 feet tall. He said it was fair-skinned with a long beard and had bear skins on his chest and shoulders and deer or moose skin on his lower half. He said the giant had very crude-looking fur shoes as well. What struck me as crazy was the fact that Dad said the giant was whistling. Then it made a deep grunting sound, and 2 wolves appeared, and they hunted together like a pack. He said they disappeared soon after getting a nice deer. He couldn't believe what he had seen, so he and his friend went to the local tribal grounds to ask around and discovered that many hunters had also seen them. They think maybe it was a family because a couple of the men claimed to see a woman about 12 to 13 feet tall and a smaller one with her. It amazed me, and I have researched many different cultures to see if there was giant lore. It appears that they mostly are in colder climates. In regard to why they are not seen very often. They are rarely seen, and when they are, it is usually in vast wilderness areas where no one is around 99% of the time. They don't live near civilized areas the way a Bigfoot will, so they are just not frequently spotted by us as a result. Furthermore, it is likely that they are even more intelligent than Bigfoot, evidenced by the occasional sightings with one carrying a sack/basket, footwear, goat hide clothing, and Stone Age type weapons. Not all of them are this bright, according to stories, but they could sure avoid us effortlessly, especially with their ability to move large distances and across difficult terrain swiftly. 7-foot tall translucent being on the freeway. Location: Vancouver, Washington. Date: January 31, 2014. Time: 2:45 a.m. A witness driving along Interstate 5 approaching the Patton Parkway overpass reported seeing a 7-foot tall translucent entity cross the road. According to the witness, he slammed on my brakes when the entity appeared in the middle of the road. I saw a being hovering about 5 feet above the ground in the middle of the freeway in the fast lane. I think it was in the process of crossing the freeway, the witness stated. It was about 1.5 car lengths in front of me. It was staring straight at me, and all I could feel from it was extreme fear. The witness described the entity as translucent and approximately 7 feet tall, with long, lanky limbs. It did not seem to be clothed but also did not appear naked, as it reflected everything around it. Although you could see through it, it still had a clear and definite form. The entity had a human-like form, but it featured 2 semi-long flaps of skin or hair attached to its head. From the side, these flaps appeared slicked back. The head was smooth and graduated into those 2 flaps by the nape of its neck. They were about 6 inches long. The witness reported that the entity immediately began to move. Then it faced east and took off running. However, it did not run like a human being or any animal I've seen. It ran while hovering, with its whole body bending in half and contorting in a fast, repetitive motion. It moved at an extremely high speed, leaving a trail or impression of its presence across the freeway. It ran across the median to the other side and into the bushes on the other side of the northbound freeway where an on-ramp meets the I-5. The witness had come to a complete stop. The whole time I stayed idling in my lane on the freeway. From the moment I saw the animal and slammed on my brakes until it took off running across the freeway, everything felt like it was in extreme slow motion, as if time had altered. It felt like the whole event took 10 minutes, but in reality the clock had only changed a minute at most. I was the only car on the road. It was foggy, but the area where the entity was had no fog, and the street light gave a golden orange glow to everything. The entity seemed to absorb this light. The being did not seem to have defined features. Then I drove off, freaked out. The sound of the baby crying made me sick to my stomach. Creature. This happened 2 years ago in Oregon. It was my birthday in April, and we took a trip deep into the woods hiking and camping, as that is my favorite thing to do. I also remember this incident well, as this was a time when my wisdom tooth was flaring up and I was in pain, not excruciating, but annoying. We had spent the day driving around the woods and hiking when nightfall had started to set in. It had rained all day, sometimes hard and other times barely a mist, but as the sun started to set, you could tell there was a nasty spring storm rolling in. We drove up a remote forest road that hadn't been maintained in what seemed like years. The trees had grown into the road and scraped against the vehicle, but we liked camping off the beaten path to avoid humans. We had come to an area where the road widened on the top of the butte and were surrounded by second-growth forest and some scattered old-growth trees. We stopped the car and prepared the car for sleeping. I don't sleep in a tent anymore. I flat out refuse. We had sat in the car listening to the wind pick up, and it was going to be a nasty, nasty storm. The trees were rocking, and it was a bit unnerving. Being at a high point in the terrain made the wind a bit worse. We had the windows down as there was more wind and the rain was only a drizzle. That night wasn't particularly cold, so it was comfortable to have the windows down. That's when I started to hear the noises. Every so often I'd hear what sounded like two men talking off in the woods. You could hear it more clearly from my side of the car when the wind calmed down in between gusts. You could kind of hear it when the wind picked up, though it was more drowned out. I could tell that whatever it was making these sounds was off at a distance. You couldn't make out anything they were saying. It sounded like they were having a very continuous conversation, though, as there were never any breaks in the noise. My roommate was talking, and I asked him to stop for a moment and listen. He then heard the voices and didn't know what to make of it. Then things got ugly, at least my fear level shot to that point. We started to hear what sounded like a baby crying off in the distance on my roommate's side of the car. That, for some reason, made me absolutely nauseous. It's the middle of nowhere, pitch black outside, and all these noises are not your typical crickets and are louder than the winds of this storm. As these noises seemed to get closer, we decided we had had enough and drove in the direction of leaving this forest road. When we got about 2 miles down the road, it intersected with a more maintained forest road, and we stopped there to organize all the stuff, as we had gotten comfortable, leaving blankets on us and food out. As we sat there organizing the stuff, we heard the sound of the people talking again at a distance, then they stopped altogether. We sat there in silence for about 15 minutes, and you could hear something running down the road from behind the car. It ran right up to the car faster than anything I had ever seen. It's like it floated, and this huge black mass came right up to the driver's side window. That's when my roommate floored it and we took off. I couldn't see any details about this creature, as it was pitch black outside, but it was extremely large and dark. The mass was like an upright cow running up to your car. We ended up getting to the main highway and drove another half hour down the ridge and camped in another location. By then we were exhausted. Nothing happened at the other location, but I was always on edge. It was a birthday I will never forget. I still deep wilderness hike, but with protection, and even then I still feel intimidated at times. As you are walking, you seem to feel fine, but when you stop for a break, you catch that feeling sometimes, like something is staring daggers through you from the tree line. Arkansas humanoid. So back when I lived in Arkansas, I had a friend on the bus with me during high school. We were riding the normal bus route, but she and I looked across a large cow field by the wood line and saw a weird human but non-human figure. It was white but see-through. It looks like 2 legs but completely smooth and straight with no feet, and then it rises into a smooth top that is rounded with no torso or legs. No one else saw this creature, but she had remembered it. Over the years I had forgotten about it, but she brought it up to me, and it jogged my memory. We don't have a photo, but we have a picture of how she remembered it looked. We lived in Arkansas in a small town. Has anyone seen or heard of it? Not to mention it also floated. This was midday when we saw it. My boyfriend is schizophrenic, I am not. The thing is, we see the same figure. I have been with my boyfriend going on 3 years and have known he is schizophrenic for the past 2. He kept info about it to himself up until we moved in together, and a new hallucination gives me the heebie-jeebies. I will catch him staring off into the dark or at dimly lit areas for seemingly no reason, with a terrified look on his face. He finally explained to me last night that he has begun seeing a new figure, and he's scared. He's been seeing the same things for most of his life, so he's grown to cope with them, but not with this one yet. This new creature is a dark 6 to 7 foot tall figure that likes to lurk around the corners in our apartment and stare at him. He describes it as an almost bird/humanoid with red glowing eyes that just stares, nothing else. This would normally be terrifying to think about alone, but I've been seeing the same thing. I don't know if this is even the right place for this, but I just need advice from somebody. Sometimes I'll see it at the same time as he does, but usually when I'm home alone. It will be peeking at me by our closet door, only its eyes visible in the dark. I'll catch a glimpse after I shut off my hallway lights. My cats will stay away from the areas I see it in. I don't believe in the paranormal. I don't think I'm schizophrenic. I don't know what's happening. What should I do? I'm honestly just scared and home alone. The little pink humanoid. Location, South Dade County, Florida. Date, May 1992. Time, late afternoon. Catherine Frankovic was walking her 2 large attack-trained dogs on leashes through a deserted grove of leafless lime trees when she heard a very loud noise. Turning toward the noise, she saw a small humanoid standing by a tree. The being had grayish/pink skin, non-porous and almost plastic-like. It stood about 4 feet 9 inches tall. It wore a snug-fitting, metallic-looking outfit that clearly showed the shape of its body. The upper part of the being's head was disproportionately wide, the eyes were huge, black, and almond-shaped, with no whites or pupils visible. It had 2 tiny nostrils, and its lips were very small and not well defined. Its ears seemed to be dropped down a little bit, very small and pressed flat against the head. The arms were very long, without muscle tone, and very skinny, extending into very long six-fingered hands. Its neck was thin-looking, and the shoulders were not well defined. It had a very slender frame and what appeared to be a small potbelly. But incredibly, its thighs were overdeveloped, with well-defined bulging muscles on its legs. Its feet, however, were small. On its feet it had what looked like a cloth boot, made out of the same metallic material it wore for its clothes. Frankovic and the humanoid stared at each other for a while. Her two dogs, normally aggressive, just sat down quietly in the presence of the being. Suddenly the being began to run, at a stunning speed, leaping with very little effort. The witness and her dogs ran after it, running a distance of several city blocks. Finally they came to a kind of tunnel that was formed from densely growing vines on dead trees. The being then darted into it and disappeared. At that same moment a powerful sulfuric stench became apparent, causing the witness to stop in her tracks. The witness felt there were other beings hiding in the bushes and quickly left the area along with her dogs. Screaming creature. I live in Melbourne, Australia. There's not much weird shit, such as skinwalker sightings or weird human-like beings spotted around the suburbs, being pretty close to the city. Now to the story. This event occurred a year ago sometime in August. My friend and I went for a walk around the streets at around 9 p.m. We were bored as we waited for our other mate to finish work, which was usually around 10. Being stupidly curious teenagers, we found ourselves in a completely empty street. There were houses, but no cars were passing through the area, and right across from us was a fenced-off area filled with lots of trees and bushes. What bothered me the most was how quiet the night went. All the crickets stopped making noise, and it was as if they just vanished. My friend was saying stupid stuff to scare me, as he knew I was pretty unnerved. I just brushed it off and proceeded to call my friend, who was just about to finish work. We began to head home, so I thought about giving him a call. I was talking on the phone with him whilst trying to keep up with my friend as he began to walk faster for some reason. Mind you that the streetlights weren't even on, which added on to my shit feeling. It was as if something was bound to happen. As I was just finishing the phone call, my friend suddenly broke into a sprint, and I ran after him, having no idea why he was running, when all of a sudden I could hear this eerie, ear-piercing screech, which made my heart sink into my stomach. We ran down to the end of the street without looking back when we reached the working streetlights. Whilst trying to catch my breath, I noticed someone or something had crawled out onto the road and climbed over the fence of that blocked-off area. It was difficult to make out, but it was as if it was a little human moving at an unnatural speed. To this day I haven't gotten the chance to find out whatever that thing was. I just hope I was just seeing things, but nothing will ever get that terrifying noise out of my head. I just needed somewhere to vent about this. I had several paranormal experiences as a child and a few in my adult years. The most recent took place as I spent the night at my girlfriend's house in Covington, Georgia. I remember we had just finished watching a movie, and she was asleep. I stayed up to see what was coming next when I caught a glimpse of something in the doorway. She does have several dogs, but they always sleep inside the room with us, so I knew it wasn't one of them in the hall. Also, the speed at which this moved was as if it tried to avoid me looking at it. If I had to describe what I initially saw, it would be almost like a black glob about 6 feet in height that just swooshed down the hall. I froze up at that point and tried to reach over and wake my girlfriend up, but I was unable to do so. After trying to calm myself down and making another failed attempt to move, my eyes seemed to automatically focus on the doorway. I then felt this heavy feeling fill the room. That is the best I can describe what I felt. Then I saw a tall, gray, muscular humanoid figure enter the room. It looked as if it was about 7 feet tall and had a third eye in the middle of its forehead. It also had what appeared to be a brown loincloth covering its pelvic area. It quickly walked past the foot of the bed and around to my girlfriend's side of the bed. I could barely move, and when I was able to, I was only able to lift my leg up and try to kick at it to get it away from her. At that moment, it communicated that it was okay, assuring us that it wasn't there to hurt us and was only there to retrieve something. I then saw it appear to reach down through the mattress and retrieve some unknown object before walking out, staring me down the whole way. As soon as it crossed the threshold of the door, the heavy feeling went away, and I was able to move freely once more. As soon as it left the room, my girlfriend woke up and asked me what's wrong. She looked shocked and afraid while staring at me, and when I finally got the courage to speak, I told her what happened. She said when she awoke, she saw that I was pale, I'm a black male and kind of dark, my mouth was hanging open as if I had just seen some crazy shit, and my eyes were huge. I just remember this overwhelming feeling of panic, my heart was beating fast, and I couldn't stop staring at the doorway. I felt as if it was going to return at any moment. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, and I tried telling my friends about it, but they always dismiss my encounters, and it sucks not having anyone to vent to. I'm glad I stumbled upon this community/channel today. It feels good getting this off my chest. I still get paranoid sleeping over at her house from time to time, and I can't sleep with my back to the door. I have never seen anything like that before, and I can't find much information when I search online. If anyone else has seen this being as well, it would be greatly appreciated if you could share any knowledge you may have. Something my friend saw a few years ago, any thoughts? My friend was walking her dog over Epsom Downs in the UK in the evening. It was in the woods behind the racetrack, and it was winter, so it was pitch black up there. I was on the phone to her when it happened. She was walking down a wooded trail using only her phone light, which she was pointing at the floor to see the path, when right in front of her in the middle of the path, maybe 7 to 8 feet or so away, there was a very bright set of eyes staring right at her. She said they were probably about 7 feet head height. She said they were quite a bit taller than an average human. They were bright yellow and huge and perfectly round and kept blinking every second or so. She didn't shine the light on it, unfortunately. She just saw it, froze for 5 seconds or so, and then turned around and walked in the opposite direction. I could hear the fear in her voice. It was strange, and the eyes seemed to glow, bearing in mind there was no natural light to reflect the light off the eyes as brightly as she described. It was a rainy, cloudy night, and there are no roads with car headlights penetrating where she was. It was so dark she couldn't even see their figure. Her dog ran back to her. It seemed to run straight through as if it ran under its legs. The dog weighs 60 kilograms, and didn't react to its presence. The bushes surrounding the path were bare of leaves and had very stick-thin/weak branches, and the eyes were in the middle, so it couldn't have been an owl. It was far too tall to have been a fox or badger. There aren't deer up there, and she said the eyes were forward-facing, as in the same distance apart in position as human eyes. She said they were very bright and huge. She definitely wasn't seeing things. She has never made up stories or witnessed anything like this before, and the fear in her voice was real. I've never heard her like that. Any idea what it may have been? I don't know what's going on anymore. It has been 5 days since I saw that alien. I really did think it left me alone and decided to play with someone else. But I was wrong. My parents haven't been able to help me either, only thinking that I need some help while my siblings are a bit on edge too. I don't know what it wants from me or why it keeps appearing, but I'm getting sick of it. I've been searching everywhere for answers, and all I get is people having difficulties finding answers too. However, this time, the experience got even worse. For being sick after my last encounter with the creature, I wasn't able to get many things done. I'm way behind with my projects, and my boss has been nagging that I need to come to work, only for her to send me back. I think it is the flu that has made me sick, so I shouldn't give the alien the fault. After I returned home, I decided to take a shower. Since I wear contacts, I had to take them out to prevent them from sticking to my eyeballs. This would mean for me that I can't see much and everything is blurry. Still in the shower, I could hear a few noises and some objects falling on the floor. Immediately, I thought it was my family. They are always searching for some things. Once the noise got closer to the bathroom, I immediately could feel myself tensing up. Panicking, I quickly shut off the water and wrapped my bathrobe around me. Carefully getting out of the shower, my eyes immediately moved to the door. Just as I thought it was finally over, there stood the alien. The same one I had seen from the night before. This time, I was able to see it much brighter than the first time. It was very tall, and those scary eyes made me almost want to scream for help. When I did try to do that, it seemed like my voice was gone. The fear had me freeze, being unable to move or talk. We stared at each other for what felt like hours, only for the alien to get closer to me. This time, I did force myself to calm down and think of something to do. I asked it what it wanted from me. This made the alien stop walking, staring at me once again as it lightly moved his head. It reached its hand out towards me, only for me to flinch and back up as much as possible. This didn't make the alien stop at all. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to believe this was some kind of nightmare. I did feel something on top of my head, and I guess it had placed its hand on me. But I didn't dare to open my eyes. A sudden voice filled my head, telling me to calm down and that it won't hurt me. What made me even more freaked out was that I heard my own voice. I have no clue what happened after that. Apparently, my mother had found me on the floor. I think I fainted, but I am not so sure. My hair was still wet, including my face, when my mother found me. Whatever that thing wants from me, it can keep it. Hunched over humanoid. This just happened about an hour ago, and I'm relaying this story as it was told to me by my dad. I live in a 2-story home with my parents. The home is pretty large, as there used to be 4 of us with plenty of room to spread out, and now that my brother has been out of the house for several years, I have the entire second floor to myself a majority of the time. I spend most of my time in my room on the second floor on my newly built computer, playing games and stuff. This particular night, however, I was on a Skype call with an Austrian girl I had met at a summer art school called Gypsies. At about 10:30 p.m., my dad came upstairs to ask me if I had been downstairs recently. I put the call on pause because the moment he asked that question, I got a strange vibe. I looked at him curiously and said, "No, why?" He replied with, "I just saw something that really freaked me out." Now, admittedly, my dad and I are both conspiracy/paranormal/ET weirdos, so the moment he said that, we were both on the same page, and I got goosebumps. My dad's office is on the bottom floor and faces towards the kitchen. In between his office and the kitchen is a short hallway with a half bathroom on one side and a washer/dryer room on the other. The kitchen is at the end of the hall, the front door is on the right, and the back door and stairs to my room are on the left. To put it into perspective, my room is almost immediately above the office. There are 2 entrances to the office, the other, which I haven't mentioned yet, is directly to the left of my dad's desk, and it leads to the master bedroom. At nighttime my dad keeps the door to the master bedroom closed because my mom is usually in bed before he's done working, and he has his desk light on, facing him. The light mostly blinds his vision, and his computer monitor obscures his view of most of the hallway ahead, but he can see a bit of the hallway on the left side and the underside of the monitor. Now that I've explained the layout to you, I can actually tell you about the experience. He said that he was working on his file, he's a home appraiser, and he heard something that sounded like someone rubbing up against a wall and then a rather loud bang, kind of like they caught themselves from falling by pressing their hands against the wall. His first thought was that it was me, and then he looked up to see what it was, and he saw a hunched over humanoid figure running swiftly out of the bathroom and around the right corner at the end of the hallway towards the front door. He said it looked like it was wearing a white shirt, and it was a little smaller in stature than me. To put that into perspective, I'm a 135 pounds, 18-year-old male, about 5 feet 10 inches. To explain what I mean by hunched over, imagine that you're running with your hands in between your knees so that your back is arched down and your knees are bent low. About that same time he heard a similar noise to the previous one next to him in the bedroom, and so he called out my mom's name to see if she was in there. She replied, so he knew that the second noise was from her, but what he had seen was not hers. He went out into the kitchen area and turned on all the lights to see if he could find anything. He found nothing. It's worth noting that our front door and back door are always locked at this time of night, and both make a loud enough noise when opened that whatever it was couldn't have just opened it and left without being heard. He came upstairs to ask if I had been downstairs, and as I said, I hadn't. Also, my shirt is blue. Do you have any idea what that might have been? It sounds like something is outside with me whenever I'm outside past 11 p.m. So I've been staying out in my driveway pretty late while working on my car for a few days, and I keep hearing something moving around out of sight. I thought maybe it's an animal, because we do get some smaller guys in the neighborhood plus outdoor cats, but I've heard something quietly say hi whenever I'm doing something and focusing. An example is tonight, I was just putting the oil pan back on after applying RTV, and as I'm locked in holding the pan up and threading in some of the bolts, I hear a faint hi from the rhododendrons. I stop and look over, and well, nothing is there. So I shine my flashlight over and still see nothing, but I hear something say hello really quietly. This happened maybe 15 minutes ago. I've locked myself in my car and have heard 3 or maybe 4 more highs and hellos from the same area. I'd like to know if anyone could provide an explanation. Is this a bird or small animal that I shouldn't worry about? Or is something actually dangerous stalking me, like a spirit or creature? My father's uncle shot something strange in a forest. My father told me about this incident. It happened to one of his uncles sometime around the year 1957. Back then his uncle often used to go hunting in the forests of Mangaldoy since my father's ancestral home is in Mangaldoy, Assam. Like on many other days, his uncle went hunting alone and climbed up a tree to wait, planning to shoot any deer or other animal that might pass below. That was a common path for such animals. The night was illuminated by a full moon, making everything clearly visible in the moonlight. Around that time, there was a cholera outbreak in many parts of Assam, especially in the villages around Mangaldoy. Many people had died. However, his uncle was unaware that the village near the forest where he was located had also been severely affected, resulting in many deaths. While he was waiting on the tree for his prey, suddenly he started hearing a sound like anklets or kangaroos jingling. He thought it might be a porcupine, ketelapohu in Assamese, and he got ready to hunt it. But after a while he noticed that the sound wasn't coming from a porcupine. Instead, 2 human-like figures appeared. They were of medium height and wore strange ornaments made of snail shells around their necks, on their clothes, and even on their staffs and on their feet. They moved slowly, and they kept approaching. As they got closer, he realized they didn't quite look human. Alarmed but alert, he thought to himself, whoever they are, if they come right beneath me, I'll shoot. And that's exactly what happened when they reached right below the tree. He fired his gun. The moment the shot hit, one of the figures instantly turned into a crow and dropped to the ground dead. The other let out a terrifying scream and fled into the forest and was never seen again. In the morning when his uncle climbed down, the crow was still lying there, but he didn't touch it. He went straight home. From that day on, he never went hunting alone in the forest again. 10 years ago in Fort Hood, I saw a tall transparent humanoid. So 10 years ago, at around 5 to 6 a.m. in the morning, I was outside smoking a cigarette. I had taken acid the previous night but was already done with my trip and simply coming down. As I'm smoking, my eyes become fixed on this tall 7 feet, maybe more, human-shaped being that looked completely transparent, think the Cloak from Predator, and I just felt it staring back at me. I figured I must have been hallucinating, so I just treated it as such and kept staring back at it. Years later, I find reports of others seeing these translucent/transparent beings, which made me question whether or not what I saw was simply due to the acid or something else. Keep in mind, Fort Hood is a creepy ducking place, lots of weird stuff already happens there as is. I don't know. Strange humanoids and lights seen in Canada. May, 2015, Ontario, Canada. A friend of mine recently recounted a strange story to me, and I was wondering what you guys think about it. This friend of mine owns a few hundred acres of land, which he rents to farmers to grow crops. As you can imagine, the area is rather quiet, there are not too many houses or traffic around these back roads. His house was currently under renovation, so he was staying in a trailer around the back of his property. Nothing but a potato field with an old decrepit barn poking out from the fields. One night, he said around 1 a.m. he was woken up by his dogs going nuts, scratching at the trailer door. When he went to let them out, he was surprised to see bright yellow lights behind and inside the nearby barn. Thinking they were trespassers, he let his dogs loose and went to bust out his rifle. He said as he was loading it, he heard his dogs go from barking to yelping and whining. They came barreling back into the trailer and proceeded to hide under the table, whining. Thinking these people heard his dogs, he stepped out of the trailer and fired 5 rounds into the air and began yelling as he readied another mag. He got a response when the lights around the barn grew incredibly bright. He admits that at that point he got pretty freaked out. He said that he stood there for a bit staring at the lights when he noticed 2 beings casually walking across the field towards the barn. Apparently when he saw them, he was hit with a mixture of confusion and fear. He describes them as humanoid, pale white, tall, and thin. Having very small heads in comparison to their bodies, he also notes that they must have been 6 feet 5 inches, with most of that height being leg length. He stated that they moved very strangely. Their upper bodies seemed stiff and locked, but their legs moved very fluidly, almost bringing their knees to their chest. Understandably, fear took over him. He took aim and fired 3 rounds at the beings, which just made them completely stop moving. Then he noticed a third one to his left, very close, but walking away from his trailer. He turned around, went back inside, and went for his handguns when the light outside vanished. He sat inside his trailer with silent dogs until morning. He didn't check out the barn until 2 days later. He found nothing strange there. No burn marks, no holes, all was normal. When checking the fields, he also found absolutely nothing. He told me that he was freaked out for a while afterwards, but nothing strange has ever happened on his property since then. He also likes to add that not too far from his property is a large piece of military land in the woods. It's completely fenced off with barbed wire and sports nothing but vents sticking out of the ground inside it. Apparently it's a site used for listening to and broadcasting messages into space. So that's the story. I was curious to find out what other people think this might have been. And I know I didn't tell it too well. Neither of us is anywhere near what you would call a writer lol. If there are any questions, I'll be sure to ask him and get back to you. I am infested by them. This will be a list of all the gnome encounters, possibly, I've had, and I cannot explain. I believe these spirits are curious and not necessarily malevolent, but I believe they are keeping an eye on my family 24/7. Before I begin, I believe the gnomes are starting to appear because of a recently cut down forest. I have a rich farmer living next door, and he completely cut down the tree line that marked the border between my family's property and his. We've been noticing the whole forest on our side is dying. In the last year, 5 or so trees have fallen, while 10 are currently dying and are predicted to fall sometime in 2020. This forest I absolutely adored. The whole forest was beautiful when the rays of sun entered. It felt magical, and it felt like I had a spiritual connection to it. I remember hearing crows in the air, and I remember seeing owls and owl pellets. I don't fully believe this, however, I believe that this forest had some sort of weird connection with each other, as though maybe this forest was for all to be in. Like a home. At the time, I didn't see any gnomes or any mini holes or huts, but I still felt that weird feeling. What's even stranger is that after the trees were cut down, hawks began appearing. It felt as though an overwhelming amount of darkness was surrounding the trees. At night, even today, I'm afraid to even enter the forest. It's as though the darkness will consume me, and something will pop out and kill me. The first ever experience that I can confirm as truly unexplainable is one August night. I was trying to fall asleep, rolling around the bedsheets, and turned to my left. That's when I felt I should turn to my right, and what happened was remarkable. I turned around, and right at my Nerf gun was a creature, no bigger than a popka. Figure, with green skin, little white hairs sticking out of its bald head, and raggedy clothes. I watched as this creature picked up the huge Nerf weapon compared to its size. It was as though it was examining the weapon. I watched for what felt like hours but was actually a few minutes. Suddenly, my heart sank and then started to pound. Fear was building up, I didn't want it to know I saw it. I turned to my left, contemplated for a moment, and when I turned back, it was gone. This is not the only instance, certainly not. Ironically, I was writing up a prompt about hearing voices in the forest when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a green figure dash into one of the bushes in my parents' garden. It was strange because we have no green creatures here in BC, and I clearly saw that it was humanoid and not a snake. What was even weirder was that the bush the green figure entered kept shaking, as though something was happening inside it. I was afraid of going over there, as I had an encounter with one prior and didn't know what it'd do. After 20 minutes of typing, I decided the best option was to go investigate. I grabbed a baseball and went to the bush, peering over. Nothing. I thought that was strange. Now, I told you about the voices, and some people think it could be the gnomes communicating. They seem similar, so I thought, what the heck? So, I recently had a mall that was placed in my next door neighbor's place and has a little park in between our properties. I was walking home after getting my Subway sandwich when, clear as day, I heard hey. Right behind me. I immediately turned around, no one was there. It didn't just happen once, but the same thing, same place. I was walking back home from the subway through the forest, and once I got up my property's hill, I heard a voice, and this time it said my name, Garrett. I turned around, thinking someone was playing a prank. When I heard my father's voice yell my name, I was surprised. My dad wasn't even home. I believe that the gnomes are appearing because of how many trees have been passing away so suddenly. Over 10 trees on our property are dead or dying, and I think it's because of our stupid rich neighbor. Childhood encounter. When I was a young child, about 3 or 4 years old, I had a strange encounter. My cousin and her boyfriend, both adults, came over for the evening to watch The Jungle Book with my parents and me. It was winter, so it got dark early anyway, but it was snowing very heavily. As we were all sitting in front of the TV watching the movie, something caught my attention outside the window to the left. I went to investigate and saw what I thought was some sort of bug. It looked like a stick bug, only human-sized, roughly. I could see its eyes focusing on me, aware I'd taken notice of it. However, it remained still, only slightly turning its head. As a child I was interested, but nothing about this set off alarm bells. Curious to know what this creature was called, I asked my family, "What's that? Outside?" My dad responded quickly, "It's a blizzard, watch the movie." If anyone glanced over, I can't remember, but if they did, they didn't notice it. Satisfied with the answer, I turned back around, waved, and told the blizzard hi, then returned to The Jungle Book. Later on, maybe a year or two, I learned that a blizzard is in fact a snowstorm, not a large insect. Shocking, right? To me it was. That day after school I confronted my dad. "Do you know that snowstorms are called blizzards?" "Yes. But I thought it was a bug." "You told me that giant bug I saw was a blizzard." "What? What giant bug?" So I told Dad, and then Mom, about seeing the creature and how I thought it was a blizzard and that a blizzard was just a human-sized stick bug. They assured me it was merely a dream, as stick bugs do not attain heights of 6 feet. I left it at that but decided that it must have been an alien. I was just starting to learn about them at the time and was fascinated, so it seemed a good enough explanation for 5-year-old me. I know how absolutely ridiculous this sounds, and I believe now that it probably was just a dream or a false memory, but I thought I'd share anyway. Has anyone else experienced anything like this? A possible skunk ape hassles froggers from the shoreline. October 22, 2005, Burke, Louisiana. One night my cousin Mike and I decided to go frogging near the gravel pit between Burke and Bayou Vista, Louisiana. We got everything we needed ready and backed the boat into the water at about 11 that night. We made sure our lights and equipment were ready. We heard the sound of something or someone walking in the woods by the bank. Once we both heard it and began looking, it stopped. After a few more minutes, a small branch flew into the boat. We started listening and heard another branch broken, then the sound of it hitting the water. We thought maybe someone was messing with us, so we shined our lights at the bank but saw nothing. We decided to go catch some frogs, so we started the boat and went down the bayou for 15 minutes until I saw a frog's eyes shining at me. After I caught that frog, something splashed near the boat, and we both heard a branch being broken. Mike threatened to shoot whoever was messing with us, but nobody spoke up. Sure enough, the branch was thrown and hit the boat, scaring us pretty good. We both became very nervous and decided to throw stuff back. I threw a half-filled Dr. Pepper bottle in the direction I thought the stick came from. It was quiet for about 10 minutes, and then we heard the sound of another branch breaking, and it was thrown at us. During this time, Mike said he saw someone by a tree, so we started off down the bayou again. Mike started freaking out because whoever it was running along the side of the canal and keeping pace with us. This scared the hell out of us because we were going 15 miles an hour, and the person chasing us had no light to see their way through the woods. Mike swears to this day that when he caught a couple of glances of our prankster, it was covered in brown fur, which really scared him. We floated down the bayou for at least 30 minutes until we lost our pursuer. We were so unnerved by the whole thing that we went to the Patterson boat dock and had a friend with a trailer hitch come get us. Mike refused to go get his truck until noon the next day. I have no idea how someone could have paced us along the canal. It's got thick trees and vines. I did find what looked like a fresh trail and noticed the area with the fresh broken branches had a weird, funky animal smell. Encounter with something in North Carolina, Western. Here's my story. About 2 years ago, my husband, my brother, and I were vacationing at my family's vacation home in a rural area in western North Carolina. Our house is the last house on the top of a mountain. The nearest house is located about 500 feet down the slope from our front porch, which has thick bushes and trees along the slope at a steep angle of approximately 45 degrees. This house is also a vacation home. There were no cars or visitors there the whole week we stayed. Behind the house is a slope straight up with very thick woods clear to the top for about a mile, no other houses up that way. Anyways, it was about 10:30ish at night. In May/June we were playing cards on the front porch, with a bright moon and a low-lit porch light. Just hanging out, and we hear large footsteps coming up the mountain slope from below. We all stop and look at each other. My brother stands up and says hello, but no one replies. About 3 minutes later I started feeling really uncomfortable. My gut was telling me to go inside. I expressed my concern, and my husband and brother told me to calm down, and I agreed to play another round of cards. We hear the footsteps again, clearly something on 2 feet. This is about 8 minutes after the first footsteps. It was clearly closer this time, and we all stand and peer over the edge of the porch. We all see a tall figure standing on 2 legs, looking quite tall, about 30 or 40 feet away. It's very dark, I can't see any features other than large shoulders and a dark outline of whatever it was, and it smelled like crap, like a bear but worse. My husband runs inside and grabs his gun while my brother and I back up and stand in the doorway. 10 seconds later my husband comes out back onto the porch in front of us. He says, "Hey, is there someone out there? I have a gun. Please let us know if someone's there." No answer. About 2 minutes of silence go by. We all have a feeling of straight up dread. It's no longer visible where it originally was, and we never heard another movement from it. We retreated inside once we all agreed we felt extremely uncomfortable. My brother claims to have heard tapping on the walls that night while trying to sleep, but my husband and I didn't hear anything. Please let me know what you guys think it could have been. We have seen dogs, mountain lions, and bobcats on this property, but never anything else as far as large animals go. I'm happy to elaborate the best I can if someone wants more explanation about anything. Wrath of El Pombero. Said Pombero, no relation to palm bears, is a rapacious dwarf-like creature originally attested to in Guarani culture, but of which legends have since spread across Argentina, Paraguay, and southern Brazil. It is described as a diminutive humanoid with black skin and hairy extremities and is usually said to be a harmless trickster figure, but is sometimes also known to kidnap women and force them to commit heinous acts. Of course, this wildly unpredictable entity is not more than local folklore, right? Well, according to a testimony given by one terrified community, this allegedly mythical critter is all too real and extremely violent. The community was already in a state of fear due to the recent appearance of an agaraguazu, maned wolf, in the area, which they had linked to the legendary werewolf-like monster known as the Lobezone. This general unease would reach a boiling point, however, when all hell broke loose in Barrio Santa Teresita. The harrowing ordeal of Liliana Nieves began on February 17, 2004, the Tuesday before her story was told by the online news source El Norte Digital, when over 10 witnesses would concur that they saw a rain of stones fall onto Liliana's house, located at 31 and 0000 Street in Santa Teresita. Although everyone could see the stones falling, nobody except Liliana could hazard a guess at who was throwing them. The terrified homeowner claimed that she saw something tearing mandarin and tomato plants out of the ground in her backyard and then caught sight of a person running away from the scene. Her husband and another unnamed man chased after the entity, leaving Liliana alone in the house with her sister-in-law, Norma Cordoba. While the two women were alone, a brick suddenly hurtled into the roof. Liliana frantically called Norma over to where she was standing, saying that she could see another entity. Norma said that she caught her first glimpse of the creature when a shadow shot out toward the back of the property. The shadow in question continued to pelt the house with debris until 4 a.m., at which point Norma had a breakdown and was taken to the hospital. The rampant poltergeist-like activity briefly eased up, with nothing happening on Wednesday, leading the besieged family to perhaps dare to assume that Tuesday's events were not more than a cruel prank. This hope, however, would be dashed when the assault resumed on Thursday, this time with even more ferocity. Norma was in bed at the time, and Liliana and her husband were sitting outside on the patio when stones started to fall onto the roof again. Norma got out of bed, presumably terrified that her ordeal was about to repeat itself, and went outside to see that her other neighbors were all aware of the commotion. The rocky rain struck Liliana's house and neighboring properties alike, and at this point a decent portion of the community were standing outside in their backyards gawking at the phenomenon. All the houses in the neighborhood are linked by a common patio, filled with trees with branches that touch the ground. It was into this forested area that Liliana strayed in an attempt to locate the source of the stone throwing. This was evidently a terrible idea, seeing as she didn't re-emerge for quite a while. Frightened, her neighbors started to call out to her and received no reply until a local man ventured out into the forest to find the missing woman. He was successful in this operation, but what he found was almost certainly not what he was hoping for. Liliana was sprawled on the ground, suffering from what appeared to be the aftermath of a savage blow to her face, severely wounding part of her eye and mouth, leaving it all broken. When Norma was asked about how Liliana described her attacker, she claimed that her sister-in-law had said that it was a humanoid entity about waist-high on her, and that it had covered her mouth, dragged her to the bushes, and beat her. The creature apparently abandoned its hapless victim when it heard her neighbors calling for her and was gone by the time they started searching for her. When the community brought Liliana inside, she suddenly fell down onto the floor and begged her brother and neighbors to vanquish whatever it was that was grabbing onto her feet. Confused, the bystanders stood her back up only to watch her collapse back down onto the ground as if her feet were being pulled out from under her. This frightening force was completely invisible to Liliana's would-be rescuers, yet they swung their machetes at the surrounding space in hopes of striking the imperceptible assailant. Liliana was completely hysterical, desperately pleading with the bystanders to save her from this phantom attacker. Mario Obregon, Liliana's brother, reported that she often claimed the creature would appear and expressed a desire to take her away. Trying his best to help, Mario would stand in front of his sister and try to defend her to the best of his ability but could never even catch a glimpse of the assailant. Liliana said that the entity would continually appear despite her brother's attempts to protect her. A neighbor apparently came onto the scene with a crucifix and started to pray, but this seemingly only angered the creature. It would attack Liliana even more viciously and frequently. This episode was what frightened the locals the most, seeing as it was clear to them that there was seemingly an invisible force that was trying to push and drag Liliana. She said that it was a little man, all black resembling an imp, and eventually the neighbors took her out of the house in an attempt to evade the entity, because it kept threatening to take her away into the forest and beat her. The police eventually arrived and took Liliana away to the psychiatric ward of the Hospital 4 de Junio, where she remained until February 21 of that year. It was roughly midday on that Saturday, the 21st, when Deacon Dionisio Castaña of the San Jose Parish visited the village, speaking to and praying with the frenzied locals. He agreed to bless their homes and didn't question whether the story was true or not, simply saying that they should strengthen their faith in God and reaffirm family ties in order to stay safe. According to a police report taken during the same period, a woman had been the victim of a brick attack on Friday, 20th of February, at around 2 a.m. Oddly, this is the same time as when the Agera Guazu appeared in the neighborhood. The police were dispatched to the scene and apparently noted that there were brick shards on the ground near the site of the attack. An hour later, a deputy sheriff by the name of Aldo Fernandez led an operation to return to the site and was alarmed to find that a large number of bystanders claimed to have seen the woman in question being lifted and thrown against the wall by an invisible force, apparently resulting in her being severely bruised and needing to be hospitalized. Okay, so as you can tell, this is a very intriguing case. As far as I can tell, Liliana was attacked by the creature while out searching for the source of the stones and was brought inside, where she was repeatedly pushed over by the entity, so much so that Mario stepped in to protect her but ultimately failed, leading to the community members taking Liliana outside to escape the threats of the creature. It was then that the police came. That's what I make of this, but I can see that other interpretations of the timeline might also be valid. Strange white glowing figure in the middle of a river? I'm not sure if this is going to belong here, as it's not as detailed as most here, but I thought I would share anyways. When I was a very young kid, 2 to 8, my grandparents would take me to see family in a town in West Virginia about a 45-minute drive away. One night when I was probably 5 or 6, we had stayed late and were coming back in the dark. Right after exiting the town, we drove by a river for a small while. I remember looking over the river, as I always did. I saw this strange figure standing right in the middle. It was fairly human-shaped, but it was glowing bright white, as if illuminated. My grandmother was very religious, so in my mind I ruled it as an angel without wings. As I got older, I began to question it more and more and couldn't come up with any explanations. At first I wondered if it had been a reflection, but there are no lights near the river. It couldn't have been light from a flashlight due to the size. This wasn't my last explainable experience, but the next two had nothing to do with humanoids. Shadow being seen at summer camp. I went to a farm camp that had been running for around 70 years before losing its lease in 2014 and closing. Before it was a summer camp, it was just a big ranch that had been in the family for a couple of generations. So this area had seen a lot of human activity for a long time. During the sessions, each cabin would get the chance to sleep outside in one of the big open areas. When I was maybe 13, after my cabin had slept outside, I woke up just after sunrise before anyone else was awake. I'm about to climb out of my sleeping bag to fill my water bottle when the camp dogs wake up and start growling. They were growling in the direction of the footpath to the pig's pen, where there was just a line of skinny, dead-looking trees along the path before an open field. There was a shadowy figure running up the path. It was tall, pitch black with no features, had a flat head, and had pointed arms and legs almost like a stick figure, and it looked like it was running in slow motion. Like it was being suspended by something and was making running motions as it was being pulled along. The dogs then run towards it barking, and as they get close, it disappears behind one of the skinny trees. Needless to say, I didn't leave my sleeping bag until the rest of the girls were up a little while later. I heard about the new encounter from a relative who came to visit for my grandmother's memorial yesterday. My mom's mom died about 2 months ago, and her cousin Frank, 76, and his wife Nancy, 60-something, came from out of state for the memorial, which was yesterday. I believe I have encountered them once or twice previously, but I do not recall. They were essentially unfamiliar to me. Anyway, when I met them, Nancy pulled out her iPhone and opened a ghost tracking app, so we started talking about the paranormal, which I'd never have even guessed they were both interested in. As it happens, they had driven to our house in Maryland from Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, that day, and were doing ghost tours, and they said they've done a lot of them in different states and have had many strange experiences, albeit not on the ghost tours, I found out. Throughout the weekend, we intermittently discussed ghosts, even during my grandma's memorial, which now seems strange to me. Frank and Nancy live in Delaware, and she described their home as near a 2-lane road, and there's lots of space between houses. I think it's like farmland. She said whenever a police car drives by with its emergency lights on, you can see it from a good distance as a small blue light until it gets closer and drives past her house. The experience happened when she saw the familiar blue light one night, and she didn't think much of it at first. But the light never got any larger, and at some point she realized it wasn't a cop car but didn't know what it was. She and Frank were watching a movie. He went to bed before her that night. While still downstairs, she saw the light come directly through the wall and into her house. She had some trouble describing exactly what she saw, but what she told me is the best way to describe it would be like if you imagine a surfer surfing a large wave that is cresting over and around him and it looks like he's fully surrounded by the wave. Except in this case it was blue light. Within the blue light was a man she described as older, with a walking stick, and dressed in older type clothing. It was a man she didn't recognize, but beyond that she couldn't give much detail. I believe she said the man was not threatening. I did not get a chance to ask her when this encounter took place. I did learn from Frank that both of them have seen entities over many decades, including one that regularly followed him around when he was in the Navy and stationed on Guam in the 1950s. I wish I had more detail about the man in the blue light, but our conversation was cut short, and they've already gone back home. I did find out, however, they are both coming to visit again in October, and I plan to ask them both to share more. A very good report of a couple killing a possible dogman and the government covering it up. In 1998, a retired forestry official had a strange encounter in the Apalachicola National Forest. It was 1998. I was 37 years old. I had been working with the Forest Department for 12 years. There was a fire in the Apalachicola National Forest that summer. The Bradwell Bay area was on fire when all this happened. The fire was raging pretty bad at this point. We didn't know if we would ever get it out. That morning I had reported to the command center on Helen Guard Station Road to get briefed on what I would be doing that day. So I and another guy were given the task of driving around looking for animals along the road of the Bradwell Bay area. Animals would make it to the road and usually fall out if they were injured or had real bad smoke inhalation. Our job was to pick them up and take them to the vets at the command center. The vets would treat them and on some occasions euthanize the ones that wouldn't make it. So we were driving around the area heading south, doing about 45 miles per hour. I was driving faster than I should have been. I was talking to my partner and didn't realize how fast I was going. All of a sudden we saw a black figure run out of the woods on all fours. It ran right up under my driver's side tire. I hit the animal with both the front and back tires. I was driving a 95 Dodge Ram 4x4. So I knew at that speed I had killed it. Immediately we thought it was a bear. We got out to pick the bear up and put it in the truck. Upon further investigation, we realized what I had hit was not a bear at all. It was a creature that neither one of us had ever seen. It was about 6 feet tall. It had legs, kneecaps, and feet just like me and you. The arms hung to about the knee. One arm, as a matter of fact, was down by its knee. The other one was up over its head. I had run the creature over under its right underarm, across the shoulder blade, and over the back of its neck. The creature was covered in hair. The hair on the arms, legs, and head was about 3 to 5 inches long. The hair on the back, ribs, and chest was much shorter. The muscle definition on the animal was phenomenal. It looked like a prize fighter or one of the guys you would see in the UFC. We flipped the animal over. The jaw was broken from where I had hit it with the truck. I could see, though, that it had a protruding snout much like that of a baboon or what you would think a werewolf looks like. It had eyes just like us. The thing looked a lot like a chimpanzee. We quickly radioed into the command center, and they sent 2 FWC officials out to our location. Within about 15 minutes, the FWC officials arrived, and they told us they had never seen anything like it. So we all picked the animal up and loaded it into the back of their truck. The animal weighed about 300 to 400 pounds, which is a lot of dead weight. They told us they would figure out what it was and let us know, so we had been contacted by the command center at this point, and they told us to come on back and make a statement about what we saw. So we showed up at the command center, and immediately we were brought back to a room where we were to fill out an incident report. About 10 minutes into filling out the incident report, we were asked to stop and wait because some people were coming to see us. Within 30 to 45 minutes, 2 government officials showed up. They walked us out to the vehicle. They were asking where we ran over that thing. We told them where it was, and so they examined the area. The truck had no damage. There was a black steel bumper on the front. The animal hit the bottom of that, and the tires took care of the rest. The truck had nothing unusual except for the undercarriage. There seemed to be blood and hair. The officials collected the blood and hair samples and put them away. Next, they asked us if we would get into the vehicle. They came in and took them to the location where we had run the animal over. So we complied and got into the vehicle and left with the gentleman. It was a rather quiet ride back out to the spot. They didn't say much at all except for a couple of exchanges with each other. We showed up at the spot and walked them through what happened. Then all of a sudden one of the guys, I guess the guy in charge, turned and looked at us and said, "Congratulations, fellas, you ran over a bear." I said, "Sir, but this is no bear that we hit." He quickly interrupted me with, "You don't understand, you ran over a bear." He then said that every time I tell anybody about this, I run over a bear. I was never to speak a word about what we actually hit. That I could face charges. My whole retirement could go away. They said I could lose my job and that they would slander me and make me look like a fool. So I looked at my partner, and we had no other choice but to comply. On the ride back it kind of struck me as odd that this was an actual government cover-up. They knew what this thing was that we had hit. They had seen them before, and now they were in possession of a body. For some reason they didn't want anyone to know, and they were going to great lengths to keep this under wraps. The main reason I'm telling my story is I'm hoping one of the other 3 people, my partner and the 2 FWC officials, will come forward. I figure it's a lot harder to silence 4 people than it is just 1. People need to know that these things are out there and that they are real. Are skinwalkers just people wearing animal skins? My fiancé and I were warning my younger cousin to stay off of Apache tribe lands at night when he goes off exploring. My boyfriend proceeded to tell us about a time he went camping near Flagstaff, Arizona. He went to one of the local rangers' offices to have them help him to know where he can and can't go out there. They drew happy faces where he could camp and sad faces in the places he was to stay out of at night because he would be on his own if he did. The ranger told him the reason people see skinwalkers is because some members of the Apache tribe will put on animal hides and stalk their prey, aka anyone not supposed to be on native land, and then kill them. Has anyone else heard about this phenomenon before? I'm sure it's true, but it can't honestly account for the number of sightings people have had of skinwalkers. What is your take on this? Man has a very scary encounter with numerous grey reptilian-type beings. 1994. Location, Sydney, Australia. Time, late night. After observing several large maneuvering objects in the area earlier that evening, the witness was lying in bed when he felt a presence in the room and heard shuffling noises at the foot of the bed. Then he felt a sharp pain, like a pin being stuck into one of his toes. He felt hands around his feet. Then he was able to look up and see 5 small figures looking at him from the foot of the bed. The beings had apparently come out of the wardrobe, which now looked like the inside of a large hanger that went back into the wall a considerable distance. One of the figures then proceeded to stick a long needle-like implement into one of his toes. He then noticed 3 more figures come out of the wardrobe, stand at the foot of the bed, and proceed to stick something into his leg. He was then able to move again. He then lifted his leg and stared directly at the beings. They were about 3 to 4 feet tall, with long arms, smallish heads, and a dark grayish appearance with lizard-like scales. The skin seemed to be the same color throughout the body. One seemed to be the leader, as it ordered the other ones around. At one point, as one of the beings grabbed his ankles, he noticed that it had 3 long, thin fingers. Soon the beings walked back into the hanger-like wardrobe and disappeared inside. The wardrobe hanger then disappeared into a cloud of vapor. Notes: the wife was interviewed and claims she witnessed and experienced the same thing on different occasions. The Little Peeping Gray. Bethel Park, Pennsylvania, 2016. I was sitting on the floor of my basement watching TV when I happened to glance into a mirror, beside the TV, opposite the large window behind me that looked out into my backyard. There, I saw a large head with 2 huge, angular black eyes. When I looked behind me, I saw nothing outside, but I could see a reflection of the face in the window when I looked at it through the mirror. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but when it tilted its head slightly, I knew it wasn't caused by anything in my room, as I had the TV turned off now and I was alone. I was so terrified, all I could do was sit and stare at it through the mirror and back into the window behind me. I could see that it blinked several times as I watched it. After about 30 seconds of having a fight or flight response of just freezing, I finally worked up the courage to bolt out of the room and run upstairs, where my family was already asleep. Since I was too scared to stick around long enough, I don't think I've ever been that scared in my life. I never actually saw it leave. I'm sitting in the same place where I saw it a couple nights ago. Nothing has changed position in the basement room, like lights or anything, and I see absolutely nothing in the corner of my window. I took out a measuring tape the next morning and measured to where I remembered its head being and found that it was about 4 feet tall, maybe a little shorter. Normally, the curtains to the window are closed completely, and when I'd be down in the basement by myself with the curtains closed, I would hear what sounded like movement outside. Oddly, our motion sensor light didn't come on that night I saw it, though, and the sensor is only a couple of feet away from where I saw the entity. For the past several weeks, with the curtains closed, I would be in the basement late at night and alone, watching Netflix or TV. However, I would hear strange noises outside, like movement or even tapping on the window. Until I saw this entity, I never really took notice or thought these sounds were odd or out of place, as we often have deer, raccoons, rabbits, outdoor cats, and other animals in our backyard. I always assumed the noises were just animals, but now I hesitate to enter the basement at night since we have completely removed the curtains to replace them. I saw it during a walk. I take walks in my hometown to help lose weight. I only walk at night in my hometown because it measures approximately 1 mile in length and 2 miles in width. It's not massive. Anyway, I was walking down a road heading south towards my dad's house. On my left side, there are 3 houses, and each house has a considerable amount of space between them. On my right, there's a house, a turn to go onto another road, and then 2 more houses. I'm walking, and I'm passing the second house on my left. The second house has a field that connects to the third house. While I'm passing the field, I see something under the post light. The post light is about 20 feet past the third house. I stop, and I stare at it. It's small, about the size of maybe a 4-year-old, and it's waddling back and forth. I squint to try and see, and it honestly looks like a black figure with a big shirt on or dress. I can tell it's walking on 2 feet, but it's walking weird. I stay still and just watch it walk into some bushes near the post light. I debate walking by and seeing what it was, and I do. Nothing was over there when I walked by, and I went straight home and told my dad. He said it was probably a gnome or a goblin. I don't walk past there at night. 2 hunters allegedly shoot a creature. I found the incident to be an intriguing encounter. It doesn't state if the creature was humanoid, but I'm assuming it was, since I get a feeling it was some sort of reptilian or amphibian being. This assumption holds true only if the encounter is legitimate. Argentina, hunter has a UFO experience. Raul Oscar Chavez, Chufos La Pampa. Location, rural area west of Toey, La Pampa, Argentina. Witnesses, 2. Date, December 2004. While stalking animals in a hunting preserve, 2 hunters witnessed a light described as a full moon engaging in ascent and descent movements on a hillside, subsequently coming close to the ground. The larger light, orange in color, was static, while smaller multicolored lights danced around it. It is worth noting that at the time of the sighting, there was a moment of confusion, since 2 full moons were suddenly visible, the first being Earth's satellite and the other the unidentified flying object. It should also be mentioned that smaller lights were seen during the late afternoon, engaged in strange maneuvers. In light of this, one of the hunters decided to leave the location, full of fear. He drove off in his pickup truck. The remaining hunter stayed back, accompanied by his powerful .30 caliber rifle with telescopic sight. In the wee hours of the morning, he was stirred from his sleep by noises similar to those of wild boar, coming from the location where they had previously found a dead cow, dead of natural causes, which they employed as bait. A distance of 80 meters separated the cow from the hunter. Hearing these growls, he focused his telescopic sight on the dead cow's carcass, startled by the sight of a figure he identified as an animal, surprised by its bulk and height. It was then that he decided to take the shot, hearing the characteristic noise of the impact on the body. At that moment, a very powerful light illuminated the entire region, producing whirlwinds and dirt devils with a constant, buzzing sound. Through his rifle's sight, the hunter was able to see the creature again, noticing that its posterior had a tail similar to that of an amphibian reptile. The hunter chose to wait a prudent amount of time and kept a constant watch on the location. Later, after overcoming his initial fear and the prevailing silence, he approached the carcass, confident that he had killed the creature he had seen through the scope. With astonishment, he saw that the creature he had hit with the high-caliber bullet had vanished and that the cow had been moved 90 degrees from its original position, giving the appearance of having been mutilated. No traces of blood were found in the vicinity, nor tracks or any evidence corroborating the event. The witness comes from a line of professional hunters living in Santa Rosa, La Pampa, accustomed to the wilderness and spending nights waiting for their prey. The hunter is convinced, in his words, that he had shot an extraterrestrial in disguise. Son saw a humanoid creature in his room last night. Little background, I have experienced a lot of paranormal in my life. Everywhere I live there is something there. I am very sensitive to it, and I have 3 little boys. My oldest, Gray, is also sensitive and has seen things throughout his life. He is 8. He's seen my mama that has passed, my uncle, and my pawpaw, and before we got our house, we lived in a townhouse that was new. It had been built the year we moved in, and he constantly had experiences and saw things. We recently remodeled a house and moved in about a month ago. He's told me he's seen things here and there, but this morning, they're out of school because of flu and strep. He comes into my room and tells me there was a creature that had 6 legs, was very dark with red eyes, and had a human head towering over his bed. His little brother slept with him last night, and he told me his brother was asleep. He said the thing was over him and told him that it was hungry. He said he was too scared to move or do anything. He freezes in fear. Past experiences, he's also frozen in fear and can only scream. He said the thing looked like a human's face and kept moving around the room, kind of like a shadow. He said he opened the laptop to shine the light, and it moved above his window in his room. Any ideas of what this could be? My friend's dwarf/gnome encounter. Once, when my friend and I were in 5th or 6th grade, we shared strange and spooky personal encounters with each other. We were pretty good friends, so I knew him well, and he definitely wasn't a liar. He told me this story. When he was about 9 years old, he woke up in the middle of the night. He and his sister were sharing a bedroom then. When he woke up, he saw some odd-looking dwarf thing that was sitting on the end side of his sister's bed while she was asleep. He couldn't see its face well, since it was turned in a way that he could only see its back and a bit of its side. According to him, it was doing something with its hands, like it was crafting/carving a stick or something like that. It wore a checkered yellow shirt and had a backpack on its back. Its hair was scruffy and dark. When my friend saw it, he got scared and tried to wake his sister up, but she was still sleeping, and the dwarf continued doing whatever it was doing. Then he yelled for his mom, and as she was coming, turning on the light in the other room, the dwarf stood up and walked towards the door, which was closed, and it just disappeared, like it turned to mist and went through the door, before his mother came in the room. Yeah, pretty weird. Sounds fake, and he might have just imagined this, but again, he never lied to me about anything, so I think I can believe him. Have you seen anything similar or have a possible explanation/suggestion for what it might have been? Strange in the Deep South. This is something that happened to me at a very young age. My wife encouraged me to share this to see if anyone has anything to say, basically. I had to be between the ages of 3 and 5 when this happened. I was at my grandmother's house in northern Alabama playing by the front door, an old wooden framed screen door that had a full view of the porch. It must have been around the end of July or August, because it wasn't cold. The house, from what I remember, was secluded. The nearest neighbor was about 2 miles away, nestled on a huge plot of land where my grandfather had a farm. As I was playing with some toys, I heard some kind of scratching noise coming from the door. I looked up, and I saw what looked like a man, but it was not. It was as big as I was and was either sitting or crouched next to the door, looking directly at me with a menacing smile as it scratched at the screen door lightly as if it was trying to get my attention. I, of course, in child logic, yell "Mom" at the top of my lungs. When my mother came to see what I was yelling about, I told her and pointed at the door, saying there was a monster. She looked, but when she did, it wasn't there. After she assured me it was all in my head and it was a bush that was nowhere near the door, I might add, she went back to the kitchen and left me alone to play again. Lo and behold, as soon as I started playing, I heard the scratching again. There it was, smiling at me as it was scratching at the screen door with its fingers. This time, I sat still, staring at the creature while it stared back at me. I knew if I yelled again, it would probably just run off again, and I would get in trouble. I noticed everything about it. It was small, about my size, with 2 legs, 2 arms, and very tattered clothes. It was dirty and had a human-like face, but it looked like it was pressed and distorted. The nose was long, and the smile was exaggerated and unnatural with jagged teeth, but not pointed. It had thin black wiry hair that looked wet or oily because it would shine slightly in the light with long upright pointed ears. The eyes are what scared me the most. They were black slits that reflected the light coming from the lamp inside. I noticed it just stayed right where it was, moving slightly back and forth as it scratched the door. It came to the door every night I was there. I even got bold enough to get closer to the door to examine it, because I noticed it never tried to come inside, as if it couldn't. Now I want you all to know that I am a person with a very skeptical and logical mind. I rationalized it as just my vivid imagination running away with me, or that this was, in fact, just a dream that was so vivid that I recall it as a memory. The only thing that makes me think otherwise is that when I got close to the screen door, I could feel its breath and smell an earthy odor coming from it. As I said, this was probably my imagination, but I know my parents raised me in a very strict religious household until I was about 12. So I doubt I saw anything that could have contributed to a delusion such as this, and also, I felt its breath. I will also add that my grandmother was from the old world and, before she died, taught me about the fairy folk, more accurately the differences between brownies, goblins, hobgoblins, and elves. Which, of course, struck my interest in folklore as a teenager. Later when she died, I remember how excited I was going back to the house where all this happened in hopes I would see this creature again. Of course it did not make another visit. I am sharing this to see if someone has any insight or had an encounter of their own that is similar to this. Disappearing people. A little backstory before I tell my story. I live in Campbelltown, NSW, Australia, and have seen these things. I say things because they remind me of shadow people but look to have physical bodies, through most of my childhood years. I'm 19 at the moment and have always chalked it up to my imagination. I had another encounter with something else at around the age of 12, which I haven't told anyone. From a young age I've noticed them in the corners of my eyes. Sometimes they are alone, sometimes they are with others. They look just like everyone else but seem to vanish into nothing when I try to look at them dead on. The one that sticks with me the most is when I was shopping with my parents at the age of 8. I noticed what looked like a boy and his mother staring at us from inside the window of a shop that was being renovated into a sports store, and from what I remember, they were dressed up in full winter attire, and as I turned to look at them, they disappeared, and immediately after, I asked my mother, very big on spirits and the like, what they were, and she claimed that, like her grandfather, she and my little sister see them regularly and that I also have the gift of sight, although she doesn't know why, as I'm not her legitimate son. I found out much later that she's only my stepmother. I'm looking to see if anyone else has seen them and can give me a little insight into what I'm dealing with. I also have stories about creepy ongoings in my last 2 houses and another to do with a face in the branches of a lemon tree in the backyard of my 14-year-old brother's first house. Encounter in Grand Lake, Colorado, on June 14, 2016. This is my account of a very strange encounter I had in Grand Lake, Colorado, on June 14, 2016. I felt compelled to share my experience now because I recently learned about the 1984 Isidoro Ferry encounter while watching a random YouTube video, and the details described in that encounter closely matched what I and my companions witnessed. On that particular day, my roommate, my girlfriend, her friend, and I drove from Boulder, Colorado, to Grand Lake, Colorado, for an overnight camping trip. All 4 of us were 20 years old at the time. I suggested Grand Lake because it wasn't far, plus I was familiar with the area from having lived there for a while as a kid. We drove up through Estes Park and Rocky Mountain National Park and ended up camping at what is now known as the Green Ridge Campground. That evening, sometime after 10 p.m., but exactly when I'm not sure, we walked down a dirt road from the campsite to the area where Shadow Mountain Lake drains into the headwaters of the Colorado River. There was this incline that went down to where the river started, and we walked down there. One thing I'd like to mention is that the area was significantly more heavily wooded at the time, as it was completely ravaged by wildfires in 2020. None of us had a flashlight or anything like that, and it was incredibly dark, except for how the moon illuminated the river when you'd look downstream. I remember coming to the river, looking downstream for a bridge, which would have been odd to find there, or a fallen tree to cross, but I saw neither, even though I had a good view of the river. The next thing I remember, we see from across the river what looks like a very tall person, maybe 6 feet 5 inches, maybe even 6 feet 7 inches, wearing a headlight. The light was particularly bright and clean looking, like a very clean looking white light. I'll also note that no human/humanoid figure was visible, it was just the light, though it basically appeared as if it was a human/humanoid with some light source on their head. I remember that it was briefly moving, then stopped, and started staring at us. My roommate, who was drunk, also, for what it's worth, I was the only person there who did not consume alcohol. The girls had like 2 to 3 beers, and my roommate was trashed, started calling out in a friendly way, like, "Hey buddy." The light just stayed there without responding but still very much seeming to be observing us. I don't remember how long it was staring at us, but it was extremely weird and uncomfortable. Eventually, it started moving downstream a bit. This is where everything started becoming extremely strange, and honestly scary, because the light was moving in a very steady and fluid way, not bobbing up and down or something like you'd expect to see from a headlamp someone was wearing while walking across rough mountain terrain at night. And I mean very steady and fluid. Then it disappeared. We were all weirded out by what had happened already and were talking about heading back, and then the next thing we see, the light is now on our side of the river, still no shape or form of anything visible, just the light. I'd like to emphasize again how I looked downstream on the river, which was the only clearly visible part of the setting, for a crossing and didn't see anything, including as far back as where the light appeared. I also examined old satellite images on maps, and there appears to be no evidence of a bridge ever existing there, as there would have been no reason for one to be built in the first place. Basically, it did not make sense how it could have crossed the river and reappeared like that. We all decided that was enough and walked back up the incline to the dirt road. Once we were back up there, we looked down the incline and saw the light still staring at us, much closer now, but still without any obvious figure/shape other than just the light. My roommate started belligerently screaming obscenities at it, and then it just charged at us. The speed and way in which it moved was very non-human, as in, it was moving way too smoothly to have been just a headlamp. It also moved just a little too fast. Not impossibly fast, but just a little too fast to, seemingly, be human. We were all terrified and booked it the hell out of there. I was always a very gifted runner, so I ended up way ahead of everyone else. I looked back once and just saw the others running behind me, and nothing else after that. The girls were crying and locked themselves in the car once we got back to camp. My roommate went from a fun, boisterous drunk to completely terrified and paranoid. He grabbed a hatchet and started telling me that it was alien technology and was trying to convince me to go back with him and investigate it. I had to talk him down from that and then eventually coax the girls out of the car. We hung out outside for maybe another hour after that, kind of just not saying much. We went to sleep, woke up the next day, and drove back to Boulder. I was always skeptical about what happened, but my roommate and ex always said that something weird happened that night whenever it was brought up. My ex ended up having recurring dreams about it, and my roommate had a bit of a mental decline in the year that followed. It, obviously, ended up sticking with me as well, and recently I've been less and less able to rationally explain it. I don't claim to know what it was, only that it wasn't normal, and it has stayed with me ever since. Little men terrorizing family. My story took place a few years ago when we lived on the res in Arizona. My entire family had gotten together for my mom's birthday and spent the night at my grandmother's house out in the sticks, in the middle of nowhere. At about 10:30 p.m. her dogs started barking and howling like crazy. No one got up to check because it was pitch black outside. But I could tell that the dogs were running back and forth chasing something. I got curious, so I turned the outside light on and stepped out the front door to see what was going on. Then suddenly, something jumped from the tree onto the side of my grandmother's house and started crawling like Spider-Man all around the house. It was hard to make out, but it looked like a small man crawling like a lizard. The house was made of stucco, but it moved around easily. This thing was fast too. The dogs were going nuts. I ran into the house screaming. Everyone was terrified, and I remember crawling underneath the bed. The noises were horrible, and it sounded like there was more than one. I heard squeaking sounds that got real loud at times. They would jump on top of the roof and could be heard walking around. I don't remember how long it lasted, but I was under the bed the entire night. When dawn came, we all went outside to check out the house. There were a few bits of stucco knocked off, but not as bad as I thought it would be. The dogs were in the tool shed and too tired to move. Then my uncle got a ladder, so he and I climbed to the roof. What we saw was really shocking. There were hundreds of white handprints going around the flat roof, right up to the edge. The handprints were small in size but were human. It looked like the hands had been dipped in white paint. I looked closer, but it wasn't paint. It was almost like a thick chalk. My uncle told me not to mention it to anyone in the family, especially my grandmother. She had said all her life that skinwalkers were after her. I didn't believe her, but after that night I began to wonder if she was telling the truth. I later asked my uncle what he thought it was. He didn't hesitate and said it was definitely witches. He said our family had been cursed during the old days before the treaties. He said someone in the family was a known witch, and when they were killed, the elders had placed a curse on the family. My uncle then laughed and said that no one outside of the family remembers any of that, and it's probably a rumor anyway. Well, it scared me enough that I now believe there may be some truth to that story. After that incident, I never spent another night at my grandmother's place again. Black humanoid shadow. In September of 2021, around 7:30 p.m., I was walking my two dogs at the normal park we usually walk. As we walked along the river trail, I looked ahead and saw a humanoid-shaped black shadow slowly moving or floating near several trees. It was so weird and surreal. I wasn't afraid, I honestly believed someone was pranking me. It wasn't a tree or any shadow of a human being. It was very dark compared to the rest of the shadows, and it just moved slowly like a big dark mass. It didn't have facial features or eyes, but it was humanoid-shaped. Around 6 to 7 feet. We walked by that area, and there was nothing there. I used my phone flashlight, and there were no people around. I still don't know what it was or if I just confused a tree or human shadow. But it was definitely a weird experience. I told all my family and friends, and very few people believe it was supernatural or paranormal. Only my mom and sister believe me. Well, I saw what I saw, maybe it was natural or maybe not. But it was something I had never experienced before, and I've walked in that area hundreds of times. Has anyone experienced something similar? The thing on the roof. Hey everyone, so this is my first time sharing here, and I thought I'd make it about an experience that happened about 4 years ago. To this day I keep wondering what happened to come across my sister. It was wintertime here in the suburbs of Northern Virginia. I live with my family in a neighborhood not far from Washington, D.C., so it's not to say we're in the middle of nowhere. Although, our home is very close to a few decently large wooded parks. One night I was at my then girlfriend's place up near the city, and I got a phone call from my sister around 7 p.m., which in wintertime makes it fairly much nighttime here. I didn't think anything of it. Usually she calls me for random things she needs my insight on. A bit about my sister: ever since she was little, she loved horror movies. Growing up with her, I can tell you firsthand that she isn't easily scared. She loves the paranormal. Alright, so back to the call. I picked up the phone, and the first thing I realized was her voice breaking up. She was sobbing and could barely talk clearly. Instantly my mind started rushing with horrible thoughts about what could have happened. She kept telling me to come home as soon as possible. I asked her why. Is everything okay? She wouldn't say, she just kept asking me to come home. Obviously I got in my car and rushed home. The neighborhood is very dim, there aren't many lights, only the few solar-powered garden lamps from surrounding homes. As soon as I got home, I ran inside and asked her again, what happened? And she finally started explaining. About half an hour before she called me, she went outside to grab a few things from her car. Again, it was dark out, but when the car is unlocked, the headlights turn on. When she opened the door to the car, the light was shining from the driveway to the roof of the garage. She noticed it first from inside the car. A short, bipedal, human-looking thing standing on two jet black muscular legs. At first she said she thought it was a raccoon, but this would have been obvious to her. But this thing scared her to the point of crying. While she was in the car, her view of the rest of the creature was obstructed. It was crouching and, according to her description, scratching at something on the roof as if trying to get in. Maybe, but she wasn't going to stick around to find out. She got out of the car, pretending not to have spotted it. This thing, it acted in a seemingly intelligent way. She thought, maybe if I act as if I didn't see it, it will just stay up there and not try to attack or anything. But as she walked behind the car, she heard it stand upright. Startled, she looked directly at it. The whole description she told me was as follows. Jet black, smooth dolphin skin like legs and arms. 5-digit hands and no claws. Dread-looking dreary fur/hair? Covering its head/body. The face is what was disturbing. The face had two shining yellow eyes that glowed from the car's headlights and no nose, just two slits. It also had an expansive mouth with no lips. She took off when she made eye contact. As soon as she was indoors, she called 911, and an officer was dispatched to our house. He looked around back and tried to see if there was any damage or sign of someone climbing the roof. No footprints, no damage. It was all in place. The officer just told us to lock the doors and windows and left. It's not like my sister to be terrified to the point of calling the police. Whatever this thing was, though, I can only imagine what it was actually like to witness something like it in real life. To this day, both she and I get extremely uneasy arriving home after dark. Reappearing thing. My dad lives in a rural town where everyone knows each other. He often takes my dog out for late night walks and has encountered this thing that limps and almost runs really fast. Encounter 1. This encounter was around late July, early August, at like 10 o'clock at night. There's this dirt road that runs back behind the subdivision I live in. Anyway, my dad was walking back home when he heard a rustling in the cornfield. He heard snort-like noises similar to those made by a pig, and when he turned around, he saw a strange creature that was tall. My dad is 6 feet 3 inches, so for him to describe it as tall is impressive. I don't know why, but it was limping, and according to my dad's description, I looked down, and it had hooves instead of feet. He's never booked home so fast, also while dragging my huge dog that's barking at that thing. He no longer goes down that road and sticks to the subdivision. Encounter 2. This happened fairly recently, like a week ago. He was walking back from walking my dog. At the end of this street there's this street light. Cliché, I know, but he saw the same thing, but this time it was on all fours running at him fast. Mind you, the street light is not that far from the house because it's at the very end of the street that backs up into nothing but forest. Of course we have neighbors, but it's just strange that it's always dead silence at night. He ran inside his house, closed all the open doors that let in air, because the house we live in is an 1800s farmhouse, and we don't have air conditioning, and just sat there processing it. Anyway, if anyone knows or has any idea of what this thing is, I would appreciate it because it's really freaky. Disappearing people. A little backstory before I tell my story. I live in Campbelltown, NSW, Australia, and throughout most of my childhood years, I have seen entities that resemble shadow people but appear to have physical bodies. I'm 19 at the moment and have always chalked it up to my imagination. I had another encounter with something else at around the age of 12, which I haven't told anyone. From a young age I've noticed them in the corners of my eyes. Sometimes they are alone, sometimes they are with others. They look just like everyone else but seem to vanish into nothing when I try to look at them dead on. The one that sticks with me the most is when I was shopping with my parents at the age of 8. I noticed what appeared to be a boy and his mother staring at us from inside the window of a shop being renovated into a sports store. From what I remember, they were dressed in full winter attire, but as I turned to look at them, they vanished. Immediately afterward, I asked my mother, who is very interested in spirits, what they were, and she claimed that, like her grandfather, she and my little sister see such figures regularly. She also said that I have the gift of sight, although she doesn't understand why since I'm not her biological son. I later discovered that she is only my stepmother. I'm looking to see if anyone else has seen them and can give me a little insight into what I'm dealing with. I also have stories about creepy ongoings in my last 2 houses and another to do with a face in the branches of a lemon tree in the backyard of my 14-year-old brother's first house. Something under the streetlight. One night, about 4 or so months ago, 2 of my close friends were hanging out. We were going around town in my truck, just generally living it up. At some point during the night, we ended up near my house. We live in a decent-sized suburban town, so houses aren't too far apart. I don't live out in the sticks or anything like that. Where we were, near my house, there is a dead-end road. It doesn't go very far, only a good block or so. The whole road is populated, with houses about 100 to 200 feet apart. A couple of streetlights illuminate the dead end. We were parked right at the mouth of the dead end, with our car facing down into it. Being bored kids, we decided to smoke a bowl. Okay, maybe a few bowls. I and one of the 2 friends I was with were experienced stoners, so we don't believe the weed impaired our judgment to any extent that may falsify our story. After about 15 minutes of smoking, one of us noticed something odd under the streetlight down the way. For a moment, I experienced a sense of nervousness, as I initially believed it was one of my neighbors, and I was reluctant for them to discover me smoking. That anxiety, however, quickly turned into fear as I got a better look at what we were seeing. This thing we saw was much taller than any person I'd ever seen. It was halfway to 2/3 the height of the streetlight. It was facing away from us. It had absurdly long legs and arms and stood on all 4s. The arms were noticeably longer than the legs, as the thing had a slight upward tilt toward the front side. It looked completely hairless, with beige skin being illuminated by the streetlight, and it almost resembled a human. Imagine a human who was extremely thin, with a nearly horizontal torso instead of a vertical one. Also, picture the torso being held up high by the limbs. After a couple of seconds, which felt like minutes, one of my friends made a noise. I wouldn't say it was a scream, but more of a loud, panicked whimper. The windows of the car were open to air out the smoky cab, so the thing immediately heard the sound. Its legs and arms twisted just enough for its head to rear around its torso. It looked straight at us. I got a very good look at its face, as I wasn't yet in flight mode. Its eyes weren't pits, per se, but they definitely had something off about them. The mouth hung open, but I didn't get a look inside. Its nose didn't protrude like a human nose but rather looked like nostril holes in the face near where a nose should be. After about 3 seconds of eye contact with us, it began to move. It took 2 very exaggerated, yet somewhat speedy, steps with its arms to turn itself in our direction. I did not react. I was thrown into a sort of disbelieving trance. I had heard stories of monster sightings and things on the internet all the time, but actually seeing one in person had me questioning everything. I won't say I wasn't scared, I was terrified, but the fear was vastly overshadowed with wonder as to what the hell I was seeing. My friend in the seat to the right of me quickly snapped me out of my trance by yelling the word go and tugging my arm. Without hesitation, I started the car and reversed out of there faster than I knew I could. None of us looked back, we were too scared. Needless to say, we didn't go anywhere near my house that night. About 2 months ago, as I am writing this, I brought up the incident to one of the friends who had been with me that night. We had never discussed it, not even the night it happened, because we were just too terrified and wanted the story and the thing as far away from us as possible. But I wanted to know if what we saw was real. I couldn't spend any more time questioning myself about it. I proposed to the friend that he and I go into separate rooms and draw what we saw. We also texted the other friend who was there to do the same. When we put the 3 photos together, we were horrified. We all agree that it is the closest to what the thing actually looked like. After it was verified that we actually all saw the thing, I tried harder than ever to figure out what it was. I had thought it resembled a rake, as I had heard many creepypastas describing that, but it was far taller than any description. Next, I thought of Wendigo. The story took place in Minnesota, about 100 miles from Lake Superior, so I guess that counts as Wendigo territory. Also, for what it's worth, my dad recently took a DNA test proving that we are Dakota Sioux and Ojibwe. The Ojibwe are one of the Algonquin people who have the Wendigo as part of their folklore. However, I still haven't encountered a description of a Wendigo that matches the height or limb length of the creature I observed. If this story gets any attention, some ideas as to what it is I saw would be very valued and appreciated. Until then, I guess it's just a mystery. Weird ass encounter in Sydney Park in 2010. On the night of February 5, 2010, two young men were walking along the outskirts of Parramatta Park, in Sydney, Australia. It was sprinkling, but now it was pouring rain and storming pretty bad. They were walking alongside a deserted creek when they started hearing noises. Some noises resembled a train, despite the absence of train tracks nearby, while others sounded like children's voices, even though the men were certain they were alone in that creek. They pulled out of the area and frantically started trying to assess the situation. They were trying to think rationally, but they couldn't help but believe it was something way out of the ordinary. They came back to the creek and started hearing more noises. They were much the same, and at this point they weren't really panicking that much. When one of them looked straight ahead, he could have sworn he saw a dark figure, standing on its hind legs, walk past the tree line about 5 meters ahead of them. The witness almost hyperventilated, and they started sprinting back to a nearby gazebo. They discussed whether they should go back to one of the men's places, about 300 meters from the park and facing it as well, or if they should run back to the creek and investigate once more. They went back to the creek and immediately started seeing more shadows and hearing more unnatural, unsuburban noises. At this point it started raining heavily, and they saw a gargantuan storm cloud approaching. They decided to bolt back to the man's place. They started running in the opposite direction of the creek. One of the men turned his head for a split second, and he saw what he described as a green man. He looked to be wearing something green, covering his hair, if he had any, but it almost looked like it was attached to his skull. He did not have a shirt on, and he had dark green skin. A darker texture than whatever was on his head. He looked as if he had some sort of dead, furred animal over his shoulders, and in the opposite hand, he was carrying what looked like some sort of long melee weapon. Possibly a staff or stick. He was looking out from under the creek, therefore, the witness did not see his lower half. He had big, bulgy black eyes that literally protruded out of his head, almost like a grasshopper. He had a mouth where his chin was supposed to be. And he had a normal-looking nose, although the witness did not see any nostrils, but that's more likely due to the fact that he was at a distance. He then raised what must have been his eyebrows and gave the witness a sort of "where are you going" look. He then appeared to have shrugged, turned and walked away. He did not have any visible ears. Where his ears were supposed to be, it was just blank. The witness stood there in shock, hyperventilating, and lost all bodily functions for about half a minute while his friend yelled for him to come. He was finally able to run, and both left the area. Odd occurrences in my small town. This is going to be pretty lengthy, so I apologize in advance. I'll preface by saying that I live in a small town in the Midwest of about 300 people, basically the middle of nowhere. I recall my mother recounting a story from my childhood that has remained with me ever since. My father was an over-the-road truck driver, so he wasn't around much. That left my mother to pretty much raise my little brother, little sister, and me on her own. One night she was awakened by a bright light shining through her bedroom window. She said it was as if someone had parked their car and directly turned their bright headlights on, pointing toward her bedroom window. Her first instinct was to get up and check on us kids. She had noticed that the bright light wasn't confined to her bedroom, as it was shining through every window in our house. She saw that I was accounted for, as was my little sister, but she couldn't find my little brother, who was about 3 at the time. She's scouring the house and finally sees him in our laundry room, opening the back door that leads to our backyard. And as soon as he opens the door, the brilliant light shines in. And she wakes up. She's accepting that this was all a dream when her eyes begin to focus on the dark of her bedroom. She sees a small figure at the foot of her bed. As she sits up to see what exactly it is, it scampers off into the darkness of our house. Then she wakes up again. A dream in a dream, she's telling herself. Later that day, she's hanging up laundry and conversing with our neighbor woman, who asks her a question. "Did you guys have a party late last night?" "No," my mother replies. "Why?" Our neighbor goes on to tell her that she and her husband had a disagreement the day before, and she decided to sleep in her son's room. At about 3 a.m. she was awakened by a bright light emanating from around our house. Fast forward to a few years ago, I own our old house and have children of my own. Now, to preface this next story, I should mention that our house is set overlooking the town's cemetery. One evening after returning home, I'm carrying my youngest son into the house. I thought he was asleep when all of a sudden he started wailing and screaming while pointing across the graveyard. "Daddy, get inside, they're coming after us. They're going to take us." The green skeleton men are going to take us. So this freaks me out a bit, and I turn to try and see if there's anything he's actually seeing. I don't see anything, but he continues losing it. Once inside, he's still hysterical and wants me to lock the door and shut the shades. He strongly refused to let me go out and get the groceries. It was bizarre, to say the least. Later that week he has another spell. It's about 2 in the morning when I hear him crying and yelling for me. I rush into his room, and he's crying, begging me not to let them take me again. I kind of write this off as a nightmare, but I ask him where they are trying to take him, and he replies, where the bad Power Rangers are. I proceed to ask him where the bad Power Rangers are, and he replies, a spaceship. Now I don't know if it was just the imagination of a 4-year-old or if it was his mind trying to rationalize an actual traumatizing event. But I can't help but assume the two are connected. It is the worst feeling in the world to try to protect your child from a monster whose existence you cannot confirm. Fast forward again to this week. I started a paranormal/conspiracy podcast earlier this year where we talk about creepy stuff and have listener call-ins and experiences and such. Well, I got this email this week from the son of our neighbor, who saw the light over our house that night. The incident involving AJ and me went like this. I know it was the early 90s because I was in my '70 Chevelle. Somewhere between St. Mary's Church and where our shop is now, I was driving us home around 9 at night, with no other traffic anywhere. Shortly before the highway curves left, the most intense bright white light appeared out of nowhere. It was like a flashlight being held against my eyes. Oddly enough, as blinding as it was, I could make out the outline of what I assumed was a man about my height. First instinct was to jam on the brakes. As soon as I did, the light was gone. The car had died, and all lights inside and outside were not functioning. After a few seconds the lights came on and the car started again. AJ wouldn't even answer me when I asked him what we hit. There was no damage, and I couldn't find anything anywhere. I drove to Mom and Dad's, and AJ begged me not to get out of the car. He never mentioned it on the highway but now insisted I stay in the car. I went in and got Mom and told her everything. She went to talk to AJ, and he told the same story but refused to exit the car. He told her whatever we saw was still hiding under the car somewhere. My wife's question was, did this happen around the same time as the lights at your mom's house? His incident took place no more than a mile or so from our house. Possibly the same or similar time as the lights over the house incident. Therefore, I can't help but think that these incidents are all related and wonder what it is about our small town that has piqued someone's interest so much. Thanks for listening. Jersey Devil? Location/date, near Trenton, New Jersey, March 4, 2002, near midnight. Several witnesses were camping outside of town, and late at night, one of them was attempting to put out the bonfire when he heard the most awful and horrifying scream. It resembled that of an injured dog crossed with a scream of a woman. The witness dropped the flashlight and was joined by another witness. Suddenly out of the woods a hideous and gruesome creature appeared. It did not look human, was somewhat satyr-like in appearance, and walked on 2 legs. It had a long tail like a dragon and wings like those unicorns in fantasy books. The beast took several steps towards the witnesses. One of them picked it up and yelled at it and then shone his flashlight at it. The creature then turned towards the bushes and ran away from the area. The black stick figure. I was 15 and wasn't on any drugs at the time. I know what I saw, and I know for sure I saw this entity. Anyways, it was during the summer of 2015. My friends and I, who I'm just going to say are number 1 and 2, were walking from the mall, and it was about 9 or 10 o'clock since the mall closes, and it's a mile or 2 to get to my house from the mall. 1, 2, and I were walking. Whenever we walk from the mall or are just out hanging out, we always come by the cemetery, and there's an alley right next to the cemetery, so we come right by the alley. It's also a shortcut to home. Number 1 said, if you and 2 walk through this alley, then you're not a chicken. Like usual, he would dare me to do stuff like I would to him, so then I said, if I go, then you have to walk with us. Right after we stopped talking, we all went through the alley. This alley is pitch dark and pretty cold too. The only lights were all the way down at the end of the alley with some other lights as well. So we were halfway down this alley, and then I started getting a weird feeling like I was being watched, but it was a different feeling because it was my instincts telling me I was for real being watched, but I thought I was being paranoid. So we make our way down the alley into the light, and then I stop and turn around while my friends are looking at me. Right at that moment, that's when I saw it. A very tall, 8 or 9 foot dark figure, extremely skinny and resembling a stick figure, was just emerging into the light. And it was walking at us. I couldn't believe it at all. One number saying what the duck. When he was saying that, I ran as fast as I could. My friends ran behind me as well, thank God. We all made it out of the alley, so I turned around one last time. That was where I first saw it standing, and there was no way it could still be walking towards us after I had run so fast. We ran all the way home right after that. We talked about it in group chat, not knowing what we saw at all. Believe me or not, but there are things out there in the world that could be real, and sometimes I judge myself if I was making it up, but I know I saw it, and my friends as well. If anyone can get me any information about this thing, it would be much appreciated. Just be careful where you walk, and be careful in this strange world. Childhood experience that years later makes no bloody logical sense. I suppose there's no better place to share this. I suppose you guys will be the only people to take this even remotely seriously. This was back in the late 1990s. I was 3 years old, and I and my father were taking a walk with the dogs down to a park nearby our house. On the way there we passed these large gaps between the sidewalk and the road that drain away excess rainwater. Being a kid, I'm curious to see what's in there, so when we passed the one nearest our house, I wandered away from my dad, and we bent down for a look. I looked around and saw what you'd expect to see in a drain, a tangled mass of drenched leaves, sweet, candy, wrappers, etc. But what grabbed my attention was what looked like a small, handmade, humanoid stick figure made of wire and beads and random bits of plastic, like some preschool art project. It was moving and cocked its head in my direction as if it were a living thing that had just been startled. Now I'm 3, so I laughed and waved, and the little figure waved one of its arms back. Then he disappeared, not in a paranormal sense, just gradually faded out of view like you would expect something would if it moved away from a light source. It's this almost natural effect and the slight disturbance it made on the bits of leaves and other rubbish around it that convinced me to this day that it was a real thing with a real presence in the environment. My dad was, of course, curious why I was seemingly waving at a random drain, and I remember explaining to him that there was a little man down there and receiving a lukewarm "oh, okay" response. Now at 3, your sense of natural and unnatural is still in flux, and I thought nothing of the fact that a random stick figure had suddenly come alive and waved at me, and I spent the rest of my childhood never seeing anything of the type again or being very concerned with what was down there. Recently I've begun jogging in the same area again, and I still regularly pass that same drain, and for some reason I feel oddly comforted when I do. Unlike many experiences here, mine wasn't scary in the classic sense. As a kid, I thought the figure was harmless. It's only years later now that I think back on it and struggle to come to grips with any logical explanation for what I know I saw. So what do you guys think? Ever heard or seen anything similar? Man claims to be attacked twice by Yowies. Dean Harrison, a Yowie researcher, asserts that the mysterious hairy creature has almost killed him twice. So when the QT continued our hunt for evidence of the elusive beast in the Ipswich area, it was worth having a chat with the man who has had numerous Yowie encounters and interviewed the witness to the sighting of the Mulgowie Yowie back on August 15, 2001. Harrison, who runs the Australian Yowie research website, has been searching for Yowies for over 20 years. He has provided a recorded interview with a certain Steve Doyle, who on September 22, 2013, was driving with his wife on the Laidley Rosewood Road at dusk when he got one hell of a fright. I glanced to the side of the road, and it was my height, 5'4". It just looked like a person standing on the side of the road, Doyle revealed. It would have been about 15 meters away from us at that stage. And as I looked across, it was running back into the scrub on all fours, after it was standing up. My wife said, "That was a bear, that was hairy," and I said, "That is just plain weird." At first I thought it was a person in the shadows, but then it dropped on all fours and went back out into the paddock. Doyle is a hunter and said, "It was nothing like I'd seen before. It was black with long hair. It would have been around 80 or 90 kilos, with a normal-sized head in comparison to us. It didn't take off at any great speed. It just lopped off." Doyle said he was later stunned to learn of a sighting in the region 12 years earlier. The QT reported on the sighting by a Mrs. Cruton near Mulgowie in 2001. Harrison went out on location to interview Mrs. Cruton at the time, who was working as a cook for a local doctor and was driving home at night. Mrs. Cruton saw the creature just outside of Mulgowie in her headlights as it was walking on all fours. She was reported as saying that it was covered in hair and looked like a large version of an orangutan. She was famously quoted as saying that it had a distinctive monkey's bottom. Shaken, she called the police and was regarded by the senior constable who spoke to her as a credible witness. That was a life-changing experience for her, and she was pretty shaken up about it, Harrison said. Then the police got involved, it all hit the media, and she laid low. It is a relatively small community, and once word got around about the Mulgowie Yowie, it was pretty much common knowledge. With the added reports over the years, it has added to the hype. Harrison said the Yowie could be a Homo erectus, thought to be an extinct species of hominid. Others suggest it may be some form of prehistoric ape. They are said to be extinct, but there are so many sightings, almost daily, that can't be ignored, he said. It has been happening ever since white settlers arrived here. We were told by the Aboriginal people about the hairy man in the bush, and we thought it was a ploy to scare us away. But as we were building roads and towns in virgin forests, we were seeing them all around the country at the same time. They were reporting back to London that we had our own indigenous primate. I think their genes are very strong and that they might have a life expectancy pretty close to ours. Maybe not as long as ours, because if something goes severely wrong, they can't go to the doctor. Harrison had a terrifying encounter with a Yowie at Kilkivan, near Gympie, an incident that saw him bruised from head to toe. He shared images of his injuries with friends. That was a game changer. I can't go back into the bush by myself. I just got hit with a big dose of reality, he said. I nearly got taken down by one at Ormeau in 1997, and that was really scary. It was only by the grace of God that I survived. I made a phone call at 11 p.m. in a clearing before going into the bush, and if I hadn't, I wouldn't be here today. This thing really meant business. But the cruncher was in 2009 at Kilkivan, and if a few guys weren't there to rescue me, I wouldn't be here. The scary thing is that Yowies have a massive advantage over us because of their eyesight in the dark. The thing that knocked me over ran down a hill in pitch darkness past obstacles, trees, and logs. The angles were so steep, but it sprinted down. It didn't miss a beat. The one that chased me at Ormeau was the same. Australian Skeptics Executive Officer Tim Mendham said the case for the existence of Yowies comes down to the evidence and the quality of the evidence. At the Australian Skeptics we run the gamut from saying that is feasible to that is highly unlikely, he said. There would be few things that we would say are absolute, 100% rubbish. But the Yowie would be towards the improbable end because of the lack of real evidence. People will say that they have got footprints or photos that are not particularly good and are open to other interpretations. You reach the stage where there are possibility and probability issues. To me, on both those scales, it is unlikely, just because of what we know at the moment. Harrison said getting a photo of a Yowie was easier said than done. We have some sketchy photos but nothing fantastic, he said. Things are going to change in the future because people have dash cameras now and cameras on their phones. When you are out in the bush and have an encounter and your mind is trying to register what this thing is, it has taken off. You don't have time to get your camera out. This is something that is unusual, and you would need a certain size population of these creatures to sustain their existence, he said. You can't just have a one-off, unless they live forever. So you do need a population, and there has to be more than two. You need a large family or tribe. Once you have that number of individuals, you would expect to have a lot more contact, whether it be photographic evidence, which can be faked, or droppings. You'd maybe need some sort of evidence of what they eat. Looking at some of the evidence on Harrison's site, there are footprints that look decidedly unreal. You'd think with that number of individuals there would be better evidence by now. The fact that we have increasing human habitation in these areas and an increasing number of people going through these areas, including bushwalkers, the suggestion that there is no better evidence than there might have been 20, 30, or 40 years ago indicates it might be something else. Mendham is not a stick in the mud and does have a wry view of the Yowie. At the Australian Skeptics we deal with a lot of fun things like UFOs, and we also deal with deadly serious things, like quack cures. To me things like the Yowies are fun, unless you are a homeless person being eaten by one. These creatures, if they exist, don't seem to do a lot of harm. They are shy and run away. Not that I am saying that they exist. Harrison would disagree about Yowies being harmless, but he does agree there is an enduring attraction to the creatures. Everyone loves a story about the Yowie. Everyone loves a mystery, don't they? He grinned. Hatman. Has anyone else ever experienced this? A little bit of backstory here, because I feel it is relevant. My father, who passed in 2012, born 1968, was a very stoic man. Not at all into the occult or paranormal, and did not ever speak of things like this, other than this one event. We're from Mobile, Alabama, where part of the Civil War took place, and the house my father grew up in directly was land used for the Battle of Mobile Bay. There are also sealed tunnels in and under a few houses in the historic district that are presumably old slave tunnels, including the house my father grew up in. My father never talked about ghosts and was very anti-heebie-jeebies. Was very quick to shut these things down if I mentioned something scared me, but he shared one story with me his entire life, maybe 2 to 3 times in total before he passed away, and would become overcome with emotions when talking about it. Thank you for bearing with me to this point. The event, when my dad was around 10 to 12 years old, he was upstairs in his bedroom and woke up with a feeling of dread, and what he explained was pure despair and fear, so he got out of his bed and walked downstairs. About halfway down the stairs, he said he was having to force himself to keep walking because he was so afraid. When he made it to the bottom of the stairs, he could see into the first archway. The den itself was dark, but the study lights were on. Inside the study, he said he saw a man, but more like a shadow, completely devoid of anything, more like the absence of everything, entirely pitch black with zero definition other than the outline of a top hat on, standing in the study. He ran to the wall in between the archways with his back to the wall and said he could hear his heart beating in his ears and he was paralyzed with fear. After about a minute, he leaned over to look into the den through the second archway and said that whatever this thing was turned its entire body toward him, prompting him to run down the hallway. This was about a week after his older sisters had played with a Ouija board in the home. I've looked this up since being told about it, and the Hat Man seems like a pretty common phenomenon, but there is no way that my dad could have known this. He didn't have the internet like that as a kid and didn't even know how to work an iPhone really even when I was older. He was a brilliant man, but just not very tech savvy. I just don't know how he would have ever made this up. Has anyone had similar experiences? When I was about 12 years old, my mom, dad, and I moved into this house after my granddad passed away. After a month or two, we had to vacate to allow for repairs on the house. When we moved back in, the house felt entirely different. We had tons of crazy shit happen there. Small hairy man has visited my mom twice since she was pregnant. The first time was 22 years ago, when my mom was pregnant with my sister. She had a fight with my dad, and it was so bad that she had to leave the house and sleep at an old lady's house around the corner. She was 7 to 8 months pregnant, so the old lady, fearing my mom could go into labor because of the stress, stayed with her in the same room at the back of the house. They say it was around midnight, and they were about to fall asleep when they saw a shadow looking through the window. They stayed still until they heard the person walking away. My mom says she thought it was my dad looking for her, so they went to see through the window to make sure. They both say they saw a small man, covered in black hair with a small tail, walking away. Now, they thought it was a monkey, even though there isn't even a zoo in that city, much less monkeys, but that was the logical explanation, until they saw it turned around. They describe it as having a completely human-like face, like a man, the only difference being its size, like a 5-year-old kid, but chubby and covered in hair. It stood there looking at them for maybe 5 seconds and then ran away. The next encounter happened 4 to 5 months after, at my grandma's house, where my parents lived. They had built a room behind the main house. My sister was sleeping in her crib in my parents' room, and I was with my grandma and aunt in the main house. My aunt says my mom came to see if I needed something. I was 2 years/0, and asked my aunt to keep an eye on me because she was going to take a nap. My aunt said sure, and my mom left. My aunt says maybe 2 minutes had passed when she heard the sounds of coins coming from my parents' room. I should say my sister had a sweater with tiny coins attached to it, so my aunt thought my sister was awake and went to grab her so my mom could sleep. She says she was walking to the room and saw the door wide open. When she came closer, she saw my mom lying in bed completely asleep, and next to my sister's crib was the same human-like thing trying to grab my sister. She screamed at my mom, and the being ran away to the backyard. She picked up my sister and said my mom was still sleeping. She had to push her for her to wake up. My mom did not tell anyone about her encounter because she thought that night she and the old lady were just tired and they saw that thing under the moonlight, not the best illumination. Yet, my aunt described this thing exactly as my mom did, small, chubby, and covered in hair, standing on 2 legs, and with a man's face. I forgot to add my dad and 2 other neighbors ran after that thing, heard it running through some bushes behind the yard, but never found it. My witchy, extraterrestrial, and UFO experiences that I am finally sharing are about to get some answers. I had a very supernatural/extraterrestrial experience when I was about 17-18 years old. This is particularly relevant given the recent surge in discussions about alien encounters. Hopefully this is the right place to share about it. It happened when I was in high school, either in 2015 or 2016, on May 6th. My best friend at the time, our 2 guy friends, and I went to a small concert and decided to go to a residential park after to chill/smoke a little weed. This was in Huntington Beach, California, in a pretty wealthy suburban residential area. We sat at a bench and were just hanging out and chatting like normal teenagers. No alcohol/heavy drugs/psychedelics were involved at all. It was a pretty large park. There was a soccer field right in front of us, and behind it was a hill that led to a residential neighborhood on top. This part is really important later. Since there were no lights behind the soccer field, The hill was really dark and difficult to see. All of a sudden, we saw 4 orange lights trailing back and forth in an S shape down the hill. And there was this sound that resembled almost a dinosaur/animalistic snarl or something. We assumed it was the cops, so we started to stand up and back away from the benches towards our car. We were stalling to see what was coming towards us. As they came into the lights of the soccer field, we saw about 5 or 6 people in black hooded cloaks walking side by side in unison. They were also playing some eerie music from a stereo or something. All of them formed a circle, and one of them came into the middle, took off his cloak, was naked, and started hitting and slapping his chest really hard. I remember him being bald and very pale and hitting his chest so hard that it was leaving pink marks on his skin. Then he blew a horn of some sort, which made that sound that resembled an animal's snarl. Then all of them turned around, looking at us in unison, and started sprinting towards us. I started to run, but for some reason my friends weren't really running at all. Then they started getting really close, and then we all panicked and ran into our cars. Once we were in our cars, they all had lined up on the sidewalk looking towards our cars, then turned around in unison and walked away down into the park. My friends and I parked our cars facing each other and called each other on the phone to talk about what happened. We assumed it was some kids from HB High School, which they nicknamed Heroin High because there are very interesting characters that attend that high school. We ended up just staying in the car for a couple hours talking and trying to process that whole situation. 2 hours passed, and it may have been 1 or 2 a.m. Out of nowhere, some sort of giant aircraft came out of nowhere, and it was flying above the neighborhood over the top of the hill. It looked like what a UFO would look like. I had never seen anything like it before. All of us were in shock. I looked over to our friends in the other car, and all our jaws were dropped, and we did not say a word to each other. It wasn't one of those moments where someone sees a UFO hundreds of miles away in the sky for a couple seconds, and then it just disappears. This UFO was just hovering above this neighborhood for at least a minute or two. Long enough and close enough for me to roll down my window and stick my head out to study it. I remember the noise of the machinery too. I remember seeing 3 red lights and 3 blue lights spinning in circles as it was hovering. I remember trying to study the whole aircraft and trying to remember all the details. Then it descended down into the neighborhood and just disappeared. And I emphasize, this was a suburban neighborhood in Huntington Beach. There's no landing pad, there's no airport, there's just nothing that would allow any planes or aircrafts to land or take off. It just descended and disappeared. And we waited until 4 a.m. to see if anything would happen after, but nothing did. Afterward, we went home and went to sleep. The next day, I did some research, and from what I can remember, May 6th was Walpurgis Day, Witches' Day. I tried to see if there were UFO sightings, and I remember seeing an article of someone reporting a UFO in Singapore or somewhere in Asia, with similar red and blue lights. Could these two things somehow be correlated? I recently reconnected with my friend, and we got to chat about it years after it happened, and our stories are still the same. I ran into one of the guys a few years ago at In-N-Out Burger. I literally just called his name, we made eye contact, and I said, "Do you remember me?" He said yes and then said my name. And all I said to him afterwards was, "That day. That was real, right? I'm not crazy?" And he immediately replied, "That shit was real." We exchanged smiles, he grabbed his food, and left. Could anyone provide any clarity on this? It happened so long ago, and I kind of just suppressed the memory. But it was very real, and I was finally searching for answers. Please let me know. Thanks so much. I live in mid-TN. I had no interest in Sasquatch stories for most of my life. I believed in them and watched the shows every now and then growing up, but never once was that stuff anything that I was going to experience. All of those things live out in the West, in California and up into Canada. Well, needless to say, that all changed for me in 2010. It was Memorial Day weekend. I live on the edge of some very dense woods. The property behind us is a 60-acre tract without any fence or border. It is all open, nice, and pretty. I was preparing to clean out our central air unit's cooling vents with a pressure washer. I heard something that sounded like a tree limb breaking at first. Then it just kept going on and on. So I turned around, and this thing took off. Big, black, and fast. It was running and kind of panting or grunting, if you will. It sounded like a track athlete, wide open, and sticks, limbs, brush, and everything in its path were cracking, snapping, breaking, and so on. I did not know what to think of it and was completely in shock. It was about 50 yards behind me when this first happened. Dumbfounded as I was trying to put it all together, I kept on trying to figure out what the heck it was. A few days later at night, our dog was barking and would not shut up. We have a fenced-in backyard, and he stays back there. Opening up the back door to tell him to shut up again, I flipped on the floodlights. Just then I saw he was at the back of the fence, where the woods start right behind the fence. When I turned on the lights, I saw two limbs swing back into place about 7 feet off of the ground. Like something was holding the limbs apart trying to get a clear view, and the limbs were in the way. Wondering what the heck that was, I go grab a flashlight and his dog leash to bring him inside. Then when I went to get him to put his leash on, he was in a different part of the yard barking and wagging his tail at something that had his attention. As I approached him, I stopped in my tracks as a smell overwhelmed me that I have noticed before, but this time it was so strong I was dry heaving and my eyes were tearing up. That is when I knew this was a squatch. Since the smell was up close and personal that night, I knew this thing had been around here a long time. I had noticed the odor before while out in the woods but never knew what the heck it was. Well, that is what started this whole thing here with me. Since all of that happened in 2010, we have heard wood knocking, screams, the smell, whoops, and a few sightings. I have caught one staring at me from behind a tree, and I have seen one going through some brush. I have scared off a few more of them while just walking around doing chores and all. They never threaten us or cause much trouble really. They are around quite often, as the smell is heavy in the air when some are present. After speaking with some locals on my road, I discovered that we are not the only ones who have seen them. So with that said, I could almost write a book on the experiences I and the people I know have had here where we live about them. Anyways, I thought some of you might like to listen to this. Shadow people or something? When I was younger, around 10 to 12, I used to always have this odd feeling that I was being watched. I'd always see something out of the corner of my eye, especially when it was darker, and it would disappear if I looked at it directly. I shared a bedroom with my two younger brothers, and we'd sleep with the light on outside the room in the hallway. Every night for about a year, I would sleep with my back slightly to the door. That was the way I would always see it. It peered around the corner from the door and watched me, or us. It wouldn't really move or blink or anything like that. It had no facial features at all. It was like a solid silhouette of a human shape but slightly larger, or at least from what I could tell from just seeing the head and the shoulders. Whenever I tried to directly look at it, it would hide behind the door. I got up one night and ran out to look in the hallway, but there was nothing there. I had asked my brothers if they ever saw it, and they said they did, but we never spoke about it after that. I stopped seeing it after about a year or so after telling my dad about it, who, being a very religious person, prayed for it to stop following me. I honestly don't know what it was. I've heard many similar stories, and I hope it was just my imagination, but it just seemed too real to be just that. Strange humanoids around the world. 1. Brown-skinned midgets, etc. One afternoon in the fall of 1957, a 15-year-old anonymous boy was working in the fields south of the small town of Ejstrupholm, Denmark, when a large metallic craft landed just 100 feet away. To his utter astonishment, two 3-foot-tall, brown-skinned ETs wearing transparent helmets with antennae came out. The witness was so afraid that he considered throwing rocks at them. After a few moments, they returned to the craft, which took off diagonally into the sky. The witness was so amazed, he at first told nobody but his family. Only years later did he share his encounter with researchers, but only after they encouraged him to do so. 2. Lover's Lane aliens. Late one evening in the fall of 1966, a young couple drove to an isolated rural location outside of Rockford, Illinois, to enjoy each other's company in private. Without warning, a bright light like a welder's arc appeared overhead. They quickly pulled a U-turn to flee the area, but before they could get away, they saw two gray figures with big black eyes and wearing strange jumpsuits staring back at them. They both felt their hair stand on end and smelled a pungent metallic odor. It was an experience they would never forget and kept secret for decades afterwards. 3. The ETS in the melon field. Around dusk on September 12, 1971, Juan Rodriguez Dominguez, who was employed as a guard for the giant El Lunareja melon farm in rural Osnalcollar, Spain, got the shock of his life when a massive, shining silver, torpedo-shaped craft landed a short distance away. Dozens of tiny figures wearing blue uniforms emerged. They showed particular interest in an artesian well on the property. When Juan confronted them, the ETs chased him, shooting paralyzing light rays at him. Afterwards, the people in town inspected the landing location and found dozens of tiny footprints around the well. 4. Nuclear researcher humanoid encounter. On the night of June 29, 1973, a nuclear researcher and college professor was driving with his wife south of Chalk River, Ontario, Canada, when they noticed a brilliant star-like object pacing their car. It remained in view for an hour. Soon it came closer, revealing itself to be a solid, spherical craft with rectangular portholes. And through them they could see short humanoid figures looking down at them. It crossed the road directly in front of their car and then zipped off. They reported it to authorities, who told them they must have seen a passing jet aircraft. 5. Humanoid investigates gravesite. On the evening of July 23, 1977, a family in Lindley, New York, was shocked to see multiple star-like UFOs and then little humanoids with glowing green belts running around their backyard. One of them walked up to a gravestone and seemed to levitate it. Both witnesses then got a splitting headache and dry eyes. The witnesses finally called the police, and the UFOs and humanoids quickly left. In the field they found mysteriously cracked stones and little holes in the ground. But this was just the beginning of a weeks-long series of incredible encounters. Soon others in the area were also seeing UFOs and humanoids. A beam of light struck one man, causing strange medical symptoms. 6. The ETS and the Flying Box. One summer evening in 1978, an anonymous man was walking his dog near his home in Beeston, England, when he saw something that made him doubt his own eyes: a giant shoebox-shaped craft floating slowly just above the rooftops. Most amazing, inside the object, he observed several 10-foot-tall skinny figures wearing strange white jumpsuits looking out through tall glass windows. A few of them in the front of the craft saw the witness and began to wave at him. The man managed to get another witness just as the object floated off into the distance. 7. ETS offers cake. On the evening of December 3, 1979, teenager Lillian Carlson was taking a short walk around the park near her home in Västervik, Sweden. Suddenly paralyzed, she encountered a craft in the field right next to her. Two ETs emerged and began to float towards her. They were 5 feet tall, white, and glowing. They approached her, holding a piece of what looked like chocolate cake. She refused the offer. The ETs spoke telepathically among themselves, but Lillian could hear them talk about her. They said that she wasn't ready, then turned around and floated back to their craft, which took off. The witness ran home crying and in fear. 8. 3 little floating aliens. Around dusk on January 12, 1983, Ed Egan, pseudonym, and his 2 young sons, John and Daniel, were shocked to see a little bald man with large dark eyes wearing a gray jumpsuit outside their home in Pine Township, Indiana. It was peering over a fence and holding a glowing T-shaped object almost as big as itself. They ran outside to investigate and saw that it was floating off the ground. Seconds later, they noticed a second floating figure, and then a third, all in different spots. The witnesses approached within just a few feet of one of the figures before all 3 converged together, glowed brightly, and zipped off upward into the sky. 9. The Glowing Giant. Late in the evening of March 6, 1983, Madame Fauquin-Bergue was with her family at home in a rural area of Pas de Calais, France, when she noticed a strange glowing figure moving around outside her home. Looking more closely, she saw it was at least 7 or 8 feet tall, with a glowing white head, and wearing a silver jumpsuit. Realizing it wasn't human, she grabbed her children and ran to another room. Earlier that evening, she and her family had been puzzled when they heard a strange sound and saw the entire house lit up with light. Looking outside, they saw a weird craft dart away. 10. The Shrugging Gray. It was about 2 a.m. on July 21, 1991, when 3 preteen girls decided to go outside and jump on the trampoline in the backyard of their home in a small town in central Missouri. They all saw a strange light zip by, and just a few moments later, a 4-foot-tall gray figure approached them. It tiptoed towards them, shrugging its shoulders and opening and closing its mouth in a weird way. The girls fled fearfully into their home, but the gray then began to stare at them through the window only inches away. It continued to stare at them several times throughout the night. The girls finally ran to the basement and stayed there until morning. So I have been a lurker for a long time and finally decided to make an account. I have a few intriguing stories I'm sure some of the different groups will appreciate. I live in Las Vegas, and as anyone who has been here in the summer knows, it's hot. It's scorching hot. Like when you open the oven door and get blasted in the face with heat, kind of hot. In June or July 2014 I stopped at a gas station, like I did almost every day. I'm a computer technician by day, so I always spend my days driving around town. So it was very hot and very sunny out, with no cloud cover whatsoever. On the pavement here in Vegas, it can get over 150 degrees even though the airport temperature says 115 to 125 degrees from the thermometer 30 feet up in the goddamn shade. It was hot as ever, and I was quick to get inside and back to my air conditioning. At this gas station, there are 2 big automatic sliding doors on each side of the front with a sub-sandwich shop attached. The counter made a sort of bracket shape between the 2 doors and is about 15 to 20 feet long, with a cashier on each end. I get in line behind 2 other people and wait my turn to pay for my gas, minding my own business. I see this guy outside the door looking in, and he was big. Really ducking big. I'm 6 feet 3 inches and 240 pounds, but this guy made me look tiny. He was about 6 feet 8 inches and about 325 pounds big. He walked in, and immediately I noticed there was something way off with this guy. He is dressed in full pilot's gear from what looked like the World War I era. He had a gigantic coat on, the inside looked like it was lined with some sort of wool. He was dressed in layers, with massive combat boots to go along with the whole thing. He had on those goggle glasses that are blacked out, making big black glass circles around each eye. He was dressed for cold flying in an open cockpit airplane. Not the Las Vegas summer. And far from the two airports, mind you. He came in so fast, though, and appeared right behind me that I don't even remember him taking steps. Just whoosh, and he's half a foot behind my back. I'm not normally too paranoid, but this put me on edge. I can feel him breathing on my ducking neck, which is a problem. So I don't know whether he read my mind or my body language when I thought to myself, this ducker is going to catch an elbow if he gets any closer, but either way, as soon as the thought crossed my mind, he took 2 big steps back. At this point I'm pretty on edge, and I glanced in the glass door on the hot dog warmer and could see his reflection in it. As soon as I looked at him, he ducking smiled. From behind me. Now, I see all kinds of people say the cliche he had sharp teeth, so spooky, but when this guy smiled at me, I swear to God it looked like a goddamn shark's mouth. His smile reminded me of Bruce the shark, from Finding Nemo. Teeth and all. At this point I started tripping pretty hard, and adrenaline started pumping. Just then, the guy in front of me finished, and I walked to the counter and asked for $20 on whichever pump. I turned around to get a good look at this guy as I turned to walk out the door. This dude was smiling directly at me and hadn't moved up in line when I went to the counter. That's when I got a look at the skin on his face. It looked like he had a small, fake skin mask stretched over his face and was, at one time maybe, pretty detailed. But it was pale white and ridiculously wrinkled, but all horizontal wrinkles, because the skin looked so stretched over his face, it was too tight to wrinkle normally. It looked like the skin was about to split in the middle of his face and come off but was held in place by whatever. He kept smiling that horrific smile at me as I walked out the door, pretty quickly, might I add, and he didn't move. At this point my hands are shaking, and I'm in full-on adrenaline rush mode, like a primal fight or flight reflex was triggered. Like, for instance, when you run into a predator in the wilderness, such as a mountain lion or a bear. You just get this feeling that is unlike anything else. I watched the door the whole time I was walking back to my truck and started pumping my gas. I had my phone out so I could at least get a picture of this guy. So I wait, and he doesn't come out. My gas finished pumping, and I was sitting in my truck with the door open so I could snap a picture. Again, I sound cliche here, but this mother ducker never came out. I waited a good 15 minutes before I went back inside, thinking maybe he went in the sandwich shop. Of course he wasn't in there, so I asked the cashier if he saw the guy, and he didn't even remember me. Let alone the guy behind me. A lot of ducking help he was. I hate how this story sounds like something someone would make up. I like to think of myself as a reasonable person, and I'm not saying this guy was an alien, or a demon, or any sort of monster. But if I said this guy didn't freak me the duck out, then I'd be a liar. I have some more stories. I'm sure I'll share them eventually, but for now I'd like to hear your thoughts. I'm open to any ideas. This would be pretty damn scary, especially being 10 years old. Location, Maghull, Scotland. Date, summer 1976. Time, 9:45 a.m. While her brothers and sisters went out fruit picking, 10-year-old Karen stayed behind in a wood. During the walk to the wood, she watched a bright rainbow-colored light in the sky, although any connection with what was shortly to take place is unproven. Having entered the wood, Karen walked down a familiar path until she came to a clearing well known to her. The area was strangely silent. All bird and animal noises had stopped. The only sound that echoed through the wood came from the dry leaves crunching beneath her feet. Suddenly, she saw ahead of her a group of little figures, 4 in all, and she, confronted by this strange group, was unable to move. She was frozen to the spot. The entities started to come towards her, and as they did so, she could see that not only their eyes but also, more remarkably, their skin was colored blue. They were small, even smaller than 10-year-old Karen, probably not even reaching her shoulder. And then she felt hands touching her, cold and slimy. An enormous light appeared from nowhere, and the next thing that Karen can picture is lying on a big circular table, which had the appearance of hard metal but felt soft around her, almost as if it had been molded to the contours of her body. Entities surrounded her, reassuring her everything was all right. Not a word, though, was spoken. These beings looked human, but also she caught sight of taller entities whose bodies were incredibly thin, like stick insects. She believes that the small entities she first encountered may have been working for these taller aliens. The place was dark, but she remembered a light shining from somewhere. Drops were put into her eyes, which paralyzed them for a while. Karen recalls a contraption like a machine covering her from head to toe and going into her mouth. It may have examined her nostrils as well. Eventually, Karen was returned to the spot where her mysterious journey had begun. Dazed and shaken, she headed for home. When she walked in, she received another shock. Over 8 hours had passed since she had gone on the picnic. Her frantic parents had been on the point of calling the police. Extraordinary humanoids, 10 truly strange encounters. Encounters with extraordinary humanoids have been occurring across the planet for a very long time. They involve all different types of extraterrestrials who interact with a variety of witnesses in strange and unique ways. These kinds of cases are among the most fascinating of all UFO encounters. They are not simple sightings, nor are they cases that rely on hypnotic regression. The evidence to support these kinds of encounters is far more extensive than many people realize and includes landing traces, electromagnetic disturbances, animal reactions, medical effects, and more. But most important, they provide a fascinating glimpse into what lies beyond our little planet Earth. 1. Smacked by an alien. On July 2, 1953, 14-year-old Maximo Muñoz Hernández was guarding the cows on his family ranch in Villares del Saz, Spain, when a UFO landed behind him. He had never heard of UFOs and walked up to check it out. Suddenly, 3 short men exited the craft and spoke to him in a strange language. Unable to understand them, one of the ETs reached out and smacked him on the cheek. The ETs returned to the craft, which took off and disappeared. Maximo ran home and told his parents. They didn't believe him at first, until they returned to the site and found strange landing traces. 2. A hair-raising experience. Around 10 a.m. one morning in June 1954, a farmer was out pumping water at his farm in Bengoff, Saskatchewan, Canada, when he heard a strange motor sound approaching from the air. Looking up, he was shocked to see a flying saucer with a large transparent cockpit, and seated inside were 2 human-looking men. The craft passed overhead no higher than 20 feet. The witness kept quiet about his sighting for many years, until he heard other people describing the same thing. 3. Why not fight an ET? At 2 a.m. on November 28, 1954, Gustavo Gonzalez and Jose Ponce were driving through Petare in Venezuela when they came upon a glowing spherical-shaped object blocking the road. They jumped out of their truck. A small, hairy humanoid approached. Gustavo lunged forward and grabbed the strange being, only to be thrown on the ground. He pulled out his knife and tried to stab it, but the creature's skin was impenetrable. Jose ran to the police, and Gustavo was struck by a beam of light from another one of the beings, all of whom retreated to their craft. 4. The Mount Airy alien. Late one night in July 1968, Mrs. Eggers was woken in her home in Mount Airy, North Carolina, by her dog howling and begging to be let inside. As she opened the door, she noticed a large flying saucer hovering at a low level across the street. Inside it, she saw a strange humanoid looking down at her. The craft remained for 20 minutes, during which time there was a local power failure. Afterward, the witness suffered from insomnia, headaches, and dimness of vision. 5. What true beauty is. On the morning of October 2, 1968, Toribio Pereira was on a construction job in Lins, Brazil, when a UFO dropped from the sky and landed right next to him. 4 handsome, human-looking figures wearing robes appeared. One of them struck Toribio with a beam of light while the others examined the surroundings, took soil samples, and departed. Later, Toribio would have more encounters. 6. 3 aliens on Hudson Beach. Late one night in May 1971, an anonymous elderly lady was drinking tea at her home on Hudson's Beach, in Waluku, New Zealand, and looking out the window, she saw 3 strange figures on the beach. She thought they might be fishermen until they stepped on a silver strip and were drawn into a reddish ball of light, which promptly soared high into the sky and disappeared. 7. Something wasn't quite right. On the evening of May 3, 1973, Sigrid Carlson was walking her dog outside her home in Montorp, Sweden, when she saw a red ball of light in the sky. Returning home, she watched it with her son, Robert, from the window. As it came closer, they both were amazed to see that it was a craft with a transparent dome, and inside were 2 strange humanoids looking at them. The craft maneuvered around their home, at one point almost landing, and then flew off. 8. Touched by an alien. On February 23, 1975, 2 7-year-old boys were roller skating when they saw a UFO fly across the sky and land nearby. They ran up to it and watched as a door opened and a short figure came out. It walked up to one of the boys and touched him on the shoulder. The boys were paralyzed in fear but were close enough to not only see the alien but also inside the craft itself. Finally, the ET returned into the craft. The boys ran to tell their parents, who also saw the craft as it departed. 9. Come with us on a journey. Around 9 p.m. on January 27, 1983, Alan was walking to a friend's house in Bloxwich, England, when he saw a UFO overhead. Moments later, two strange human-looking figures wearing gray jumpsuits appeared ahead of him. As he walked up to them, they said, "Come with us on a journey." When Alan declined and said he didn't want to leave his life, they became insistent and promised a reward. Alan said no and prepared for a confrontation. Thankfully the ETs left. 10. Nothing bad will happen to you. On the night of February 18, 1990, a woman was walking with her dog near Korbach, Germany. Suddenly her dog whimpered and refused to move. As a large glowing craft landed, the dog ran away. A beam of light from the craft struck the woman, and shortly after, two short humanoids approached and spoke to her. "Don't be afraid." But she was afraid. The ETs spoke to her and then departed. The woman fainted and rushed home, where her dog was waiting for her. These 10 cases have much to teach us about extraterrestrial contact. They show us that many people all over the world are having these experiences, that contact often contains high levels of strangeness, that ETs come in all shapes and sizes, that a UFO experience can profoundly impact a witness, and much more. Small humanoid shadow and white smoke. So I woke up this morning around 4:30 because I heard some noises near my bedroom door and didn't think anything of it, as I have cats. So I go back to sleep and wake up around an hour later at 5:30. This time I see a small shadow figure by the door peeking through, and I'm unsure of what it's doing. It looks like it's just looking around. I assume it's my toddler, as he has recently learned to climb out of his crib, so I call his name and get no response, but the shadow crouches down and looks like it's trying to hide. I call my son's name again and get up to go get his little ass, but I pass his crib to get to the bedroom door, and he is knocked out asleep. So now I'm a little alarmed and leave the room to look around, and once I get to the dining room area, there is a puff of white smoke that is dissipating. I'm really confused and I have no idea what the hell it was or why it was peeking into the room. Whatever it was, it seemed to be about 3 feet tall, though. What's strange is that none of my cats seemed bothered by its presence. Which is kind of alarming to me. Do you guys know of any small, vaguely shaped humanoid demons or spirits or shadow people? I'd love to do research on this topic and find out as much as I can. Small humanoid sighting at night. Location: a small and quiet town in a former Soviet republic. Time: June 10, 2017, from 12 a.m. to 2 a.m., Saturday. I had a working day on Friday, so I went to bed much earlier than usual. After a normal sleep time, I woke up at midnight. I made some food, ate, made coffee, and sat on the PC for a while. It's late, so it was strange that after spending time on the internet, I decided to go outside. It was like I had an itch to do so. Of course I found valuable reasons: to throw out trash and to walk my dog one more time. I left the entrance to the house. Right after going outside, I noticed that something was a bit off. While going to the side of the trash bins, I figured out why: the outsides were very silent. I couldn't hear some students or drunk workers that are typical on this day of the week. The weather was sweet, by the way. After walking a few meters, I saw that on the old road rarely used by cars, right opposite to the trash bins, some car was parked, black dot. I've never seen a parked car there. It seemed strange to me, so I decided to go to another trash bin that is just a few meters further, one. After that I headed to the main street road. There's a wide traffic road, 2 pedestrian roads to the side of it, closed shops, benches for rest and alcohol consumption, and some streetlights. I'll be there in 2 minutes, too. Then I should go another 400 meters to the bank terminal along the road. I turned to the left and after a few meters stopped to light a cig. 3. Then I heard a powerful vehicle nearby. When the cigarette was at last lighted, I looked on the road, and there was a motorcycle going. But suddenly it started to go very slow, and the driver started to drive on the wrong side of the road. He was driving slowly near me while we were looking at each other. It was the only 100% human I saw that night. Some man in his mid-age. Nice bike. I thought he would ask me something or so. But he didn't. Then he turned his lights off and headed to the courtyards. There I was going to walk at first. But all this stuff seemed uncomfortable to me. I changed my mind about going to check the bank account, turned around, and headed home. Main part: I was returning with the same route that was passed. My dog is old and shy and doesn't really love walking. So every time we are returning home, she pulls toward the house and always shortens the paths. I freed the leash, and she pulled straight to the house. She was somewhere in the front yard far right, but I walked calmly smoking along the pedestrian road. When I came closer to the carriageway, between the roads, kind of top left, I saw some movements. There are trimmed bushes, trees, and grass, green dot. Something started to appear due to a large trunk of a poplar tree. At first I thought it was some doggo. Maybe it was a homeless person on all fours. But then suddenly, as I started to be curious enough, I saw that doggo didn't have his back part. I saw it from the side first. After a second it turned towards me. And started to walk slowly at me. I was shocked. I see some small figure in a pointed hat. I saw that it walks in some human-like but not comfortable way. It was 60 centimeters at max with the hat. And it was very dressed in some strange stuff. Many clocks, one after another. I even saw some colors, gray, brown, and orange. The body under clothes seemed kind of proportional, something between child and adult. Not so long hands, legs longer than hands, but it was in general much wider in shape than any child at this height. All this I looked up while we slowly walked closer. With my peripheral sight. All the time I was looking at its face. And I couldn't see it. A few meters aside, there was a dim street light. I see a shape of the body under the cloak, hat, and clothes. My eyesight is not so good, but it is quite enough to recognize faces in these conditions. While I saw it and walked closely, there were lots of thoughts in my head. I knew I had a phone with me. But the feelings were dreadful. It's like I knew I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I'm not brave enough to stop, pull out my phone, and start recording while this unrecognizable thing is coming to me. When the distance between us was minimal, approximately 2.5 meters, I suddenly recollected a belief in Mexico that when you see a duende, you should act like you don't see it. I did so. At the smallest distance the face was still unrecognizable. I think my brain filtered it in real time, lol. So I looked at the horizon. Calmly turned to the right and walked away at the same pace. My hair was standing. I heard nothing behind. My dog was waiting for me quite far ahead. She acts as always. Also, she's ignorant of all animals except other dogs. I pulled out my phone when I was approximately 20 meters from that place. It was 1:54. I didn't look back. Ending. A minute after I put my phone back, I heard a familiar sound of a powerful motor quite far away. 5. It was the same bike. I saw it, black broken line, driving slow along the road where that car was. The route, yellow line, of the driver, as I thought, was strange. When I got closer to the entrance, I checked the car. It wasn't there. I went home, called my wife, and told her everything. I was stunned all day long. After a few days I went at exactly that time to that place just to check. There was nothing there. Some youth had beer not so far from the place. It was a normal night. Background, I've never seen anything like this. Not before, not after. I didn't believe in duendes, gnomes, etc. I was a lurker here because my wife has had problems with shadow people, as she believes. In our culture's folklore there is nothing similar to it. There are no urban legends about something similar. Right after the sightings and some days later, I started monitoring social networks and local media. Nothing. I really don't know what that was. I have few options. It was a monkey in a gnome costume. I don't believe in that, because of the proportions and how it walks, but it's the most reasonable version. It was a midget man with a pointy hat that was really, really short. Under 60 centimeters. Maybe, but he would be a rare thing himself. Just like a monkey. Didn't hear about one in a town. It was a very deformed child. Maybe. All other possibilities are not logical enough, so I don't know what that was. It was scary. I don't drink or do drugs, except for coffee and nicotine. The situation as a whole seems to me surreal. White humanoid encounter. Okay, so here goes. I'm a 33-year-old male and don't have any, diagnosed, mental health conditions or anything. I feel that I need to get that out of the way before I say anything more. Also, I'm not looking for anything apart from another person who has experienced something similar to help me try to understand exactly what it was I saw. So anyway, as I said, I'm 33 now, and this happened to me when I was around 9 or 10 years old. I was at the cinema with family. Jurassic Park was the movie, so whatever year that was released. And after the movie, I went to the little boy's room without telling my parents I was going, so I kind of disappeared into the crowd that would gather after a movie ends and everyone is leaving. So I got to the bathroom, and I remember there was nobody else in there, but nothing felt out of the ordinary. I relieved myself, and then as I was leaving, there was a flight of stairs, roughly about 15 to 20, but I wouldn't be too sure about that detail, that you have to climb/descend when leaving/entering the toilets. Now halfway up this flight of steps is when I had a feeling that I had never experienced before or since. I remember the air sort of changed, and I felt an overwhelming sense of danger, like a sixth sense. My instincts took over, and I started to move up the stairs faster, but not quite running. As I opened the door to the toilets, I looked back down the flight of stairs, and there was this pure chalk white humanoid striding up the stairs. His face had this look of determination on it, and his eyes were locked on mine. His movements were almost like someone speed skating. I never lost eye contact with this thing until the door closing behind me broke it. I remember seeing my dad not far from where I was with a panicked look on his face, and as I went over to him, he shouted at me for not saying where I was going. He had obviously been looking for me since I never told anyone where I went. Nowadays, when I think back to his reaction and the fact that most of the crowd was away by this point, I can't help getting the feeling that I was maybe gone for more than the minute or two at most that it would have taken me to go to the toilets. Anyway, I feel that I have already gone on for a bit, so if anyone can help me with any similar experiences, or if you would like to know anything else, or test my story, as I am 100% convinced this happened and it wasn't some sort of hallucination, then leave a comment, please. Don't be scared. 10 very strange humanoid encounters. One of the most extraordinary experiences a person can have is meeting an extraterrestrial humanoid face to face. And yet it happens more often than you might think. There are tens of thousands of documented cases, reaching back well over 100 years and coming from all over the world. These involve a wide variety of humanoid creatures. This video presents 10 fascinating and little-known cases, each of which adds to our knowledge of the extraterrestrial presence on our planet. 1. I beheld an incredible thing. Francesco Rizzi, a security guard for a large textile factory in the heart of Milan, Italy, had always been skeptical of UFOs and aliens, but on the evening of December 17, 1962, his mind was changed forever. Hearing a swishing noise, he looked up and saw a flying saucer with portholes swoop down and hover a few feet above the ground a short distance away from him. Immobilized with fear, he was unable to move as a hatch opened, and a short humanoid emerged. It was dressed in a glowing jumpsuit and dark helmet. The humanoid gestured for Francesco to approach. Before Francesco could react, another humanoid came out and motioned for the first one to return to the craft. The two beings crawled back inside the saucer, which promptly took off. Francesco called the police, but by then the UFO was gone. He did learn that others had seen the UFO in the sky. As a result of the encounter, Francesco was fired from his job. 2. A nice little man. Starting in October 1965, thousands of people in the city of Mogi Guaçu, São Paulo, Brazil, reported seeing UFOs maneuvering overhead. Over the next month, the sightings continued, and a few witnesses saw the craft land on the ground, humanoids emerge, and samples collected. But it was on the farm of Dario Filio, outside of town, that the most amazing events occurred. The UFOs seemed to target the farm, with sightings occurring on an almost nightly basis. Craft would follow their cars home to the farm. Then, on November 11, 1965, Lucia Filio and her grandson were drawn outside by another UFO, only this time, it landed in their cattle pen. Short little humanoids dressed in jumpsuits emerged and began to collect samples of vegetation and carry them into the craft. The next day, the owner of the farm, Dario Filio, went to town and implored his friends to come and watch the activity. On November 13, a crowd of people, including police officers, saw the UFO land and a humanoid emerge and walk around, then go back into the craft, which took off. Meanwhile, sightings continued over the nearby city. 3. I will deny it. October 1968. After attending a youth church meeting, Suzanne and her younger sister and another high school student allowed their pastor to drive them to their homes in Litchfield, South Dakota. As they drove along a remote highway just outside of Hastings, a gray metallic, disc-shaped craft emerged from behind some trees and began to pace their car. It had colored lights around the edge and large luminous portholes. Through the portholes, Suzanne and her sister were amazed to see skinny, gray-skinned figures with dark eyes and large heads staring down at them. Suzanne and her sister told the pastor and the girl in the front seat about the UFO, but neither of them refused to look or acknowledge its existence. The UFO followed the car for several miles before darting away. The girl in the front refused to discuss it, and the pastor ordered the sisters not to talk about it in his presence, or he would deny it. 4. No satisfactory explanation. On the night of October 1, 1975, Takeshi Furuya and Michio Hikawa decided to drive up to a parking lot in the foothills of the beautiful Southern Alps near their home in Hakushu, Osaka, Japan. Shortly after they parked the car, one of the young men saw 3-foot-tall, strange-looking humanoids dressed in white outside the car. The other man could not see them. But suddenly, A strange force pulled their car backwards several feet. Then it happened again, and then a third time. Now panicked, they drove back to town and alerted their friends. None of their friends would return, so the two young men drove back alone. Once again, their car was inexplicably pulled by a weird force. They returned home, only to discover that the car was no longer working properly. 5. Don't be scared. David was only 7 years old when, one night in winter 1975, he had an encounter in the bedroom of his home in Plattsmouth, Nebraska, that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He woke up to sense a presence, and turning around in his top bunk bed, he saw a strange, shadowed face looking at him. He'd never heard of gray aliens and wondered if it might be a vampire like Dracula. After it left, David jumped down to the lower bunk and woke his brother. And moments later, both of them saw the same creature peer around the open doorway into the bedroom. Years later, David saw images of gray aliens and recognized them as the creature he had seen in his bedroom as a child. 6. Did you see what I just saw? It was a bright, sunny morning in May 1976 as two men from Valdez, Alaska, decided to take a short drive out of town. Almost immediately upon reaching the edge of the town, they saw an incredible sight, a large, shiny, metallic, disc-shaped craft with rotating lights around the perimeter sitting off the highway a few hundred feet away. To their amazement, a ramp stretched out to the ground, and two short aliens emerged and began to walk around with a sense of urgency. Realizing what they had just seen, the men turned the car around to get a closer look, but by this time, all signs of the craft and humanoids were gone. One of the men later refused to talk about the incident and then said that he didn't even remember it. 7. Not of this world. Rafael Peralta was a world-famous bullfighter when, on the night of July 25, 1982, he had a wonderful run-in with a landed UFO and a humanoid. He was driving along a coastal highway outside of Punta Umbria, Spain. He assumed that there must have been a vehicle accident, so he stopped his car and got out to help. Incredibly, it was not an accident at all but a landed flying saucer. A 7-foot-tall silver humanoid stood in front of the craft, facing Raphael. The creature seemed to grunt a few words at Raphael, who couldn't understand what was being said. Moments later, the being turned around and walked back into the craft, which rose upwards and darted off. Raphael rushed home and told his astonished wife. Both returned to the site the next day and found no evidence of the landing, but they learned that several people in the area had seen UFOs. Raphael tried to keep the encounter a secret but did tell a friend, who leaked the story out to newspaper reporters. 8. I continue to wonder. On the evening of October 27, 2010, Carlos was sleeping in his apartment home in Albuquerque, New Mexico, when bright-colored lights coming from outside illuminated his bedroom. He woke up to see a large boomerang-shaped craft hovering in the sky a short distance away. He wanted to investigate but found himself overcome with sleepiness. He was unable to keep his eyes open when he suddenly felt a telepathic link with gray ETs, who he sensed were entering his apartment. He felt an impulse to go to the bathroom, and although he didn't do anything unusual, he could feel the presence of the Greys watching him. Again he was overcome with sleepiness, and unable to fight it, he went back to bed. Later, he woke up suddenly to see a gray alien staring at him studiously from the balcony window. Again, Carlos was forced to close his eyes. He forced them open just in time to watch an orb leave his room, attach itself to the boomerang-shaped object hovering outside his apartment, and see the craft dart away. 9. A creature in our home. Emma rarely had dreams, but on the evening of October 22, 2015, she had a dream unlike any she'd ever had before. In the dream, she found herself in her dining room looking at a gray alien crouched under the table. The alien, with its large head, large dark eyes, and shark-like skin, seemed angry at the observation. Without warning, Emma heard a loud crashing noise and found herself waking up in bed with her husband. He ran from the bedroom into the dining room, followed by Emma, and they were both amazed to see that one of their tables had been smashed, two of its legs were snapped off, and the contents of the table were strewn on the floor. Weirdly, it was right under the dining room table. Checking the house, they found all the doors and windows locked as normal, but their alarm system had malfunctioned, which it had never done before. Looking outside, they both saw two glowing orbs a short distance away. Ken, I felt I was being tagged. Chris was upset. He had gone through a recent divorce and on October 6, 2023, decided to take a drive near his home in Olympia, Washington. He parked on a small bridge to vent his anger when suddenly a strange electric force swept over him. Looking up, he was amazed to see a small round craft with a transparent dome, and inside it was a small gray alien looking down at him. A short distance away and a little further up, there was another craft with two gray aliens. Chris felt a telepathic link with the ETs and felt they were observing his emotional reaction. They quickly darted away. Since then, Chris still feels the presence of the ETs and feels like they are tracking him. As governments across the world are now admitting to the reality of the extraterrestrial presence on our planet, this subject is finally going mainstream. The worldwide UFO cover-up is collapsing under the weight of its lies. There are too many cases to explain away as hoaxes, hallucinations, misperceptions, or mental illness. This subject has the potential to change the way humanity views itself in the universe and teach us volumes about life beyond Earth and life on our own planet. It is time for the truth to come out. We are being visited by extraterrestrials. Mind-boggling humanoid encounters, 6 shocking cases. 1. The alien plan. One night in April 1962, the life of 5-year-old Worthington White changed forever. He was asleep at his grandmother's home in Quantico, Virginia, when he was awakened by a light coming from the attic door above. Looking around the room, he was amazed to see 3 childlike humanoids. 2 moved over to his older brothers, who remained asleep. But 1 moved to the side of Worthington's bed and communicated telepathically. Worthington didn't realize it at the time, but the ET downloaded volumes of information into his mind. Waking up the next morning, he didn't remember the encounter but immediately sensed a change. He knew he would rise to greatness in his life. He soon began to remember his encounter. And over the years, as he was beset with various challenges, the knowledge given to him by the ETs surfaced and guided his life. Worthington eventually became a very influential figure working at the very highest levels of the United States government. 2. A gray SAT next to me. After visiting his girlfriend one evening in April 1962, Victor, age 17, decided to drive to the local diner, a popular hangout in Deptford, New Jersey. Instead, he drove directly into one of the strangest experiences of his life. He was on a remote stretch of road when, for no apparent reason, his car engine quit, and his headlights failed. As he rolled to a stop in the middle of the road, he became overwhelmed with a visceral, gut-wrenching fear. Suddenly sensing a presence, he turned his head and was shocked to see a small gray alien sitting next to him in the front passenger seat of his car. An incredible sense of calm immediately replaced his fear. Victor and the gray stared at each other for the next 5 minutes while the gray communicated telepathically, filling Victor's mind with so much information that he was unable to consciously process it. Without warning, the ET disappeared, and Victor sped away. He told nobody about what happened, except for his wife, whom he married a few years later. He says that the incident changed his life, and he began to know things that he shouldn't know. 3. The Rainbow Man. It was a sunny afternoon in the summer of 1974 as 2 young brothers, Thomas, age 5, and Kevin, age 4, played in the backyard of their home in Needmore, Pennsylvania. When a hippie-looking man entered their yard and sat in lotus position beneath their tree, Thomas warned his brother Kevin not to approach. But when the man waved at them, Kevin immediately walked up to the man. Thomas followed and promptly became amazed because first, the man began to speak to both of them telepathically, and second, a visible rainbow-colored aura emanated from the man's body. Both boys reported that the man began to show them 3-dimensional moving images of many things, about planet Earth, and about their own lives, including past, present, and future events. He shared deep philosophical concepts that would affect them for the rest of their lives. 4. I was so scared, I started to cry. Jose de Diego Vasquez was just a young boy when, one evening in 1988, he had an encounter that would shake him to the core of his being. He was taking a survival course in the El Yunque rainforest of Puerto Rico and was hiking back to camp so he could perform guard duty. Suddenly a cluster of bright lights passed overhead and then landed behind a boulder ahead of him on the path. He was amazed and petrified when a tall human-looking figure with long hair, wearing a robe, appeared and began to speak to him. After telling Jose not to be afraid, the strange figure wrote symbols on the ground, sharing startling information with him. After the encounter, Jose fled back to camp and received an incredible shock when he discovered that during his encounter, no time had passed at all. 5. The Blood of Kings. On the evening of January 10, 2010, Bruce rested on the sofa of his home in Toledo, Ohio. When an odd tapping noise on his back sliding door caught his attention, he got up to investigate. Even before he got there, he heard a telepathic voice telling him not to be afraid. Bruce was a large, strong man and not easily scared, but when he pulled back the curtain, he was deeply frightened to see a small gray alien staring back at him. Despite this, he opened the door, and the gray stepped inside. Bruce calmed down as the gray began to hold a long conversation with him, explaining that they had watched Bruce since he was a young boy, and told him that they were very interested in his genetics and why. Bruce asked the little gray a long list of questions, and the gray answered all of them, explaining who they are, where they come from, and why they are here. 6. The Harvesters of Memories. Like most contactees, Christopher's contacts began at a very young age. Starting around age 4, he recalled being visited by a little gray in his home in South Dakota at least twice a year. On each occasion, Gray would stand by his bed and observe. Christopher was always paralyzed and overcome with fear. As years passed, his fear lessened, and instead he became irritated at being unable to communicate and interact with the Gray. As a child, he was prescribed medicine to treat his Asperger's and depression. At the age of 16, he abruptly stopped the medication due to its negative effects. He immediately began to excel physically, mentally, and creatively, and his visitations doubled in number. Then, on the night of February 26, 2015, Christopher had a visitation that changed his life forever. He was awakened when he felt a presence in his room. Instead of a small Gray, he saw an 8-foot-tall elder Gray who proceeded to hold a long conversation with him, answering many of Christopher's questions and sharing with him volumes of information about how they are and their agenda on our planet. I saw something in the bush. I have shared this story in other places before, but something new has recently come to light, so I will start from the beginning. I live in an Australian city that is surrounded by a lot of bushland. The house I live in has a lot of bushland in front of it, and that is where I believe the thing hangs around at night. The first time I saw it was in the summer. I was in my front yard around midnight when I heard rustling from the bushland. I watched the trees, thinking I was going to see a possum or stray cat, but what came running out of the bush was humanoid, very tall, very fast, and pale. It was dark, so I didn't get a good look, plus it scared me terribly. It didn't run towards me, just to another part of the bush, but I ran inside to my room. That is usually where I end that part of my story, but there is a part I leave out. I was home alone that night, and when I got to my room, I heard noises on my roof, not normal ones like possums or birds, but noises that sounded inorganic, like it wasn't an animal but a machine. They confused me, but I didn't tell people about them because it didn't seem important. I've had a couple minor encounters since then, weird growls from the bush and such. I had mostly forgotten about it until this morning, when I woke up and my sister was awake, which is unusual. I usually leave for work before she wakes up. But she told me about weird noises on the roof last night. She described them similarly to what I heard that other night. It petrified her and my stepsister, because they ended up sleeping in the same room that night, and they do not get along with each other at all. If something gets them to spend the night together, it must have really scared them. My sister told me the story, but my stepsister refuses to talk about it. I believe whatever I saw that night made those noises. I just want to know if anyone here knows what it might be on my roof at night. My 31 years of life. I may, or may not have, received leukemia in the summer of 2015 from a UFO. It took over a year of both not knowing I had it, finding out I did, and being too scared to face treatment, because when my grandma had cancer, it was the chemo that, to my 13-year-old mind, made her die faster and more painfully, to finally follow through with treatment, starting on Thanksgiving 2016. In December 2015, there was a time I was puking up blood, which I later found out to be one of many signs I had experienced radiation sickness, along with the development of leukemia, AML, a non-hereditary cancer. My family was promised my death, yet I reached remission around 2 years later. I also developed GVHD, graft versus host disease, which my doctors said roughly 40 years beforehand would have meant certain death and was untreatable, and even when treated is just as deadly as cancer, yet I overcame that. I was told I would never be able to have children, yet my wife and I have two, one of whom is autistic. It is commonly understood that children with autism often possess extraordinary minds and thinking capabilities. My son, who is 3 years old, is currently nonverbal, which leaves me wondering about his future. I have many questions as to the how, and why me. Why didn't I hear the craft that stopped over my tent while camping in the sticks of Freeburg, Illinois? And more importantly, why did it take me roughly 2 years to even remember seeing the craft? I can't say in my memory that there's any recollection of seeing any beings from that night, but considering my life has never been normal, having an alcohol and cocaine addict for a mother and an absent father, I've had a lifetime of things most people would never believe. My mother once taught me to play on an Ouija board and how to make one, and after that, after a cabinet in the kitchen kept opening and closing, I jokingly set out a plate and said, "Maybe it's hungry," because I was 11, and my mother put it back and said, "Stop being stupid," and immediately a bottle of dish soap flew off the counter at least 10 feet and struck the back of her head. Next I'll discuss. I can't recall whether it was before or after the Ouija board experience, but I remember being a child around that same young age and waking up to what appeared to be a long-haired little girl standing over my face as I slept, just for the kid to be completely gone before I had time to even put my glasses on. I can't see things without my glasses unless they're right upon my face, Yet the hall light was on and certainly bright enough through the doorway to see a small figure with long hair watching me sleep. And I could recount numerous stories of this nature, including one from a long time ago when I inexplicably wandered away from my stepfather's mother's farm. The only detail I recall is informing the police officer who found me that I was following the Undertaker. I was an adult before I knew the definition of an Undertaker. To me, the Undertaker was specifically the pro wrestler portrayed by Mark Calloway. My whole life is riddled with mysteries like these. I was 22, turning 23 a month later when I started treatment, so I was 21 when I saw the craft, or rather, the craft saw me. I just turned 31 on December 18, 2024. In the summer of 2013, I was out walking around a tiny town next to Cahokia called East Carondelet/Dupo, Prairie DuPont, which may as well be the same town, each being much smaller than the already small town I grew up in. That ex-girlfriend of mine had told me she herself was a practiced Wiccan, although I later learned she practiced if and when she needed to. Not only did I wake up one night and remember speaking in a high-pitched growl of a voice that wasn't my own, but I also said the words "she is evil" and immediately fell back out. Upon waking, I told my ex, who was still asleep at the time, about my memory of a dream involving a blonde woman in a white dress who went down into a cellar. Her jaw dropped as she responded, "There's a blonde woman in a white dress that everyone in my house has seen, and my mother tells me she's had nightmares of this woman choking her as she slept." Considering that girl later turned out to be cheating on me, perhaps this was a warning to me versus an attack. We dated for 4 months, and another night we were walking around back roads in the area surrounded by cornfields. One night it was me, my ex, Kat, BTW, was her name, and her friend Brett when I randomly looked back and noticed someone walking behind us in the darkness. Aside from moonlight and one streetlight that was in the middle of a lonely road that went for about a quarter of a mile, I pointed this shadowy figure out, and my ex said, "I know, I see it, don't look back at it again." Naturally, curiosity couldn't resist. That's when I saw it walk under that only streetlight to find it to be a perfect humanoid that appeared to be made of darkness, a walking shadow if you will. We get further, and I look back again. It's still seemingly slowly following us, but this time it was in the shape of a huge wolf that appeared to be running but not gaining the speed it should have been. I couldn't help but notice that it had an imperfect form, almost as if it were made of smoke and unable to maintain a solid shape like that of a wolf. In either form I saw no features, no typical glowing eyes or shining teeth of a lizard or shark. Just walking, shape-shifting black smoke. I'd also like to add that I was born at an Air Force base, although my dad received a dishonorable discharge from the Army on account of my mother being a teenage mother who just randomly got uprooted from southwestern Illinois to somewhere in Texas, and there are also at least 2 airports within 30 minutes of where I live. I even grew up in the town of Cahokia, named after the famous Cahokia Mound site that's actually located in what's known as Fairmont City, Illinois. I know aircraft and what they normally sound like and have definitely only seen 2 in my life to ever move or act the way the one that stopped over my tent did. The second time was a few months ago during the aurora, which I watched from my backyard in Belleville, Illinois, when suddenly I saw a perfect orb of light that's never out there and hasn't been out there since, and as soon as I saw it, it moved behind trees and never came out the other side, when I definitely would have seen it do so had it been a regular craft. I want to make it more clear that after studying and learning about other supposed contactee stories, or anything relating to the supernatural/paranormal, I think many of my experiences could have been related to whatever aliens I may be blocking from my memory, and in many of these cases, like Whitley Schreiber, who also turned out to be born at an Air Force base and found out his experiences go back to childhood. So the girl I saw in my room may have been a disguised being, either physically or mentally making me see a girl. Could be a ghost, or one of the infamous black-eyed children. Now I can't recall specific features other than the short height, the long blonde hair, and the lighter skin. I've heard stories about Becks, black-eyed kids, being related to or working with the men in black, and some others claim them to be demonic in nature. And I found stories that state aliens and angels/demons could be one and the same, beings of a higher dimension, versus all of these beings being from another planet. Some could be, but some stories say many are beings beyond time itself. I remain with a skeptical eye when I hear bumps in the night, always looking for logic first. But some things simply cannot be paid off with simple logic. That same summer I saw the UFO. I saw a hooded figure watching me from the woods near Shiloh, Illinois. I was so terrified that someone might be playing a cruel joke on me, or that I was being stalked by an evil being or a member of a crazy cult. And today, I've also found many stories of ETs coming throughout history in the form of cloaked figures. I was so terrified by it, though, that I simply went back into my ex's mom's house and didn't say a word to my ex about it. I didn't want to scare her, nor potentially get authorities involved in case it was some crazy cult. There was also the summer of 2016 in which I was driving my car on the back roads near Cahokia and Columbia, Illinois, known as Triple Lakes Road. This is one of my most credible stories because, in this instance, I was not alone. Instead of an ex whom I no longer talk to, I was with a friend, my best friend Gage, who had never experienced anything like what happened in the passenger seat. It was dark, and we were aimlessly driving back there. I myself was not usually behind the wheel, so I didn't know the routes of where they all came out. Gage did. Mind you, we were always hitting roadies, as they're called. Ours only involved the roasting of marijuana, typically in the form of blunts. Eventually Gage asked me if I knew where I was going, and I said, no, but I figured with you here you can help me if I get lost, or we'll just pull up the GPS app. Eventually, out of nowhere, it seemed the turn I took ended at what I can only describe as a house from Scooby-Doo. No lights aside from the moon to show enough of the house, a huge house with a circular driveway in front. What didn't make sense is that every other house out there, you had to hit a hard 90-degree angle to the driveway. This house, it's like the road ended with this house. My friend immediately said, we need to get the duck out of here now, then reversed, turned around, and floored it. As we drove further down the road, we saw what appeared to be a transparent, torn up sheet resembling some type of spirit, with a completely distorted and blurred image where its head would be. Gage, after about 10 seconds of this thing literally hovering above my Toyota Corolla, keeping up with my at least 50 to 60 miles per hour movement, says, dude, my ducking eyes are watering, which shook me because I said, mine are too. It also seemed neither of us could even try to look away from this. Had anything walked into the road, such as a deer, we would have crashed hard. Eventually we got so far that it simply vanished. The next day my cousin Ben, who knew the routes by memory, said, there's no way you could have ended up where you did because I know those ways, and I have never seen this house nor road that suddenly ends with a big creepy looking house. He did know we would not lie about this, nor did he think we were lying, he was simply confused as to how it could be possible. There's also a repetitive occurrence throughout my life of streetlights randomly blowing out when I'm in vehicles that pass them. It's happened too often for me to think it's a coincidence. I've heard stories about this being potentially ET or even angel/demon related. But I pointed out a light that blew out 2 months ago as I was dropping off my 14-year-old sister and even verbally stated how weird it's always been to me how often that happens. As I sat in my mom's driveway making sure she got inside okay, the light to my left started to flicker, and as I looked at the street light, it blew out. The more I remember, the more bizarre experiences I have. Some will say this is all made up bullshit. I trust that you, as the channel publisher, understand that I could easily write a book to share all of this and attempt to profit from it. However, I aspire to be an author of fantasy and fiction instead. Some will never believe these stories, but for those who do, know you're not alone. Never alone. There are 12 dimensions of beings watching this earth, according to my constant research. I just want to hear from other people who can confirm I'm not completely insane more than anything else. You cannot imagine how desperately I want my story to be shared, both for my sanity and to find out whether I am merely the cattle of the evening or if there is something more that I was told but do not remember. I have never seen a hypnotist and am slightly afraid because once you know, you can never unknow.